The Throne of Glass girlies are top tier. No one can touch a Throne of Glass girl. No one can touch them. They are all spectacular, amazing, perfect, brilliant. And YRENE Towers is no exception. I love her so much. I'm so glad she's finally here in a real way. Hi, my name is Nichelle. Welcome back to my channel. Today, I'm going to be telling you everything that happened in the Tower of Dawn. It's not the, it's just Tower of Dawn by Sarah J. Maas, which is the penultimate book in the Throne of Glass series. We're getting so close to the end, guys. Are you sad? I'm a little sad. This might be the most hated on book in the series because it really centers around my beloved Chaol. And I know he's not well liked. We're going to talk about that in a second. But I feel like this book is so good. It is so underrated. It is very soft, I think, compared to the other books. I think that's sometimes why people don't love it. And it's just like a much slower, much softer, much more introspective book. I mean, there's still stuff that happens. Actions be actioning. Also, we learned so much really important stuff in this book, and it has some of my favorite characters in it. But it is like just a little bit softer, a little bit slower. And I'm excited to chat about it with you. Let's jump into it. Let's chat about Tower of Dawn. Okay. Hi. I want to give a little disclaimer before we start. I know some of you are probably here. This is your first video of mine. I've been making this whole series where I've been recapping every single book in the Throne of Glass series, but maybe this is your first book because you're trying to skip Tower of Dawn. You're like, I don't want to read a whole book about Chaol. But I want you to know that if you're watching this video instead of reading this book, I am judging you. Like, there's so much important stuff that happens in this book. It is a book about Chaol bettering himself, okay? Like, if you are a Chaol hater and then Chaol spends a book going to therapy and you're mad at him about it, like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, what do you want from him? Also, YRENE Towers deserves better. She deserves better. She's the creme de la creme, one of the best characters in this series, and she deserves your time and energy and patience. That being said, you can say I'm not the boss of you. Literally, you can read this series however you want. I just know that I am judging you. If you're watching this video instead of reading the book, I am judging you, but like, you're welcome to stay. Okay. Also, if this is your first video, you might not know that I actually work personally for Chaol. I'm on his payroll. I do run his PR. So I will be trying to defend him at every turn. Although, like, I feel like Chaol needs slightly less defending in this book than Queen of Shadows. In Queen of Shadows, I was working overtime to try to defend my boy. This book, you know, like I said, he's in therapy. He's bettering himself. It takes him a second to get there, but like, he is getting there. He's making progress. He's doing good. Spoilers! Like always, obviously, if I'm recapping every detail, I'm going to tell you what happened in this book, so I'm going to spoil the whole book. I will try to be very aware of not spoiling what happens in Empire of Storm. I make no promises, but I will like try my very best to not spoil Empire of Storms. For those of you who are doing the tandem read, which I do love, I will be talking about some stuff that happens in Empire of Storms, like as it comes up and like aligns with this book. Does that make sense? So like if it has already happened in the tandem read, I might talk about it in this book. Chaol has no idea what's happening in as far as Empire of Storms, what's going on the northern continent for the most part, but there are a couple moments where you like can't not point out what is actually happening on the northern continent, and I will be just like mentioning those. Not very often, but occasionally. If for some reason you're reading Tower of Dawn before you read Empire of Storms, that's okay, what a weird choice. Yeah, I would be careful. I don't think I'll spoil anything major. I mean, the last chapter spoils all of Empire of Storms. I hope you know that. I will have chapter markers down below if you are doing the tandem read, and you can bounce back and forth between the two videos. How cute, how fun. Let's catch up with our two besties. Our main crew, so Aelin and Rowan and Manon and Dorian and Lysandra and Adian and Elide and Lorcan are up in the northern continent. They're minding their own business up in Empire of Storms. We really won't be seeing or hearing much, if anything, about them. We are mostly focused on our bestie Chaol. So if you recall, Chaol, at the end of Queen of Shadows, was paralyzed in the exploding of the glass castle and kind of that incident with the former king of Ardelan. And so he's come down to the southern continent now in order to seek out the healers of the southern continent. They're like world famous healers of the southern continent to see if they can fix him up. Get him on his way again. A little bit about Chaol. We know he's besties to Dorian Havillard. Like, that's probably like his most important trait, is that his best friend is the king of Ardelan now, Dorian Havillard. He is the former captain of the guard, but has been promoted to Hand of the King now that Dorian is in charge. And he's also the ex-boyfriend of Selena Sarthothian, the assassin who will then become Aelin Galathinius. They had like a brief relationship. At this point, like almost a year ago, not quite a year ago, 6 months ago. I don't know how time works in Throne of Glass. It's not my business. Things ended when she returned in Queen of Shadows. And now he's kind of in like a situationship, I would say, with Nesryn. I was a little confused on the timeline. between him and Nesryn, but some girlies in the comments helped me sort things out. So him and Nesryn actually started hooking up the summer before Aylin came to Rifthold. The summer she was in the salt mines, they were hooking up then. But then when Selena arrived in Rifthold, they broke things off. They like stopped seeing each other. Chaol was busy. Then he got in a relationship with Selena. When that ended, he got back in a situationship with Nesryn. But things are kind of like weird and tense between them, honestly. It's like very situationship. Like they're not like professing their love feelings for each other. You know, he's essentially got two purposes down in the southern continent. He is here to get his back fixed and also to see if he can get an alliance with the southern continent people to help them in the war that's happening up in Aurelia. And then we have Miss Nesryn. Nesryn is the current captain of Arlene's Guard. That's the position she was promoted to when Dorian became king. She has ties to the southern continent through her father's family. Her father's family is from here, and her mother is actually buried here in the southern continent. So this is like sort of like a homecoming in a way, although she grew up entirely in like Rifthold and Arlene. She's the current situationship of Chaol, like I mentioned, and she's also like an emissary of Terrasen, although Chaol has that official position. She's also acting on behalf of Aylin in that capacity, and she's also like a really good archer. She's like skilled, she's talented. All the girls in this book are skilled, talented, amazing, spectacular, and Nesryn Falik is no exception. And she has been sent to the southern continent to kind of act as Chaol's chaperone. She's accompanying Chaol on this journey to get his spine fixed, and also, like I said, to hopefully get some aid for Terrasen in the war that they're facing against Ardelane in the northern continent. So we open this book with them arriving in Antica, which is like the capital city of the southern continent. Why doesn't the southern continent get a cute name? The northern continent's name is like Aurelia. The southern continent doesn't get a cute name, which kind of seems unfair, to be honest. So that's where they are. That's their boat landing. We will be going to some other places in the southern continent, but like for the most part, they kind of hang out in the capital, or at least Chaol does. All right, let's jump into the book. The first part of this book is called The God City, which is like what Antica translates to. We start this book with Chaol being grumpy, which is like not shocking if you've been here before. Chaol is not really great at like adapting and having a positive attitude in difficult situations. They have just arrived to the palace in Antica. Maybe I'll take a second here to point out that I should not be your guide to pronunciation. No. Every single video, well, maybe not every single video, a lot of these videos, especially the first video, I get comments like fairly regularly that are like, hey girlie, they're always very sweet, okay? If you've commented one of these, I see you, I hear you, I'm not mad at you. They'll be like, hey girlie, you are literally mispronouncing everyone's names. Like, that's not how you say literally any of these. And with all of the kindness and warmth in my heart, I wish I was doing better, but like, unfortunately, I don't feel this will change. I'm like not great at pronouncing things in general. And these are fantasy books that have like weird spellings of things. And I understand there's a pronunciation guide. I also understand there's an audiobook where someone will pronounce this the way that they're supposed to be pronounced. I'm sorry, I will mess up the pronunciation. You should not use me. You should not use me as your guide of how to pronounce things. But unfortunately, I also will not be changing. You can still tell me if I'm pronouncing things wrong. Glad to hear it. Love to hear how things are supposed to be pronounced. But like, odds are I'm not going to be able to change my ways because I've been pronouncing them in my head that way for too long. Okay, back in Antica. We get a sense of the vibes here, which seems to be like a Mongolian, Middle Eastern inspired world. Sarah has actually directly said that this was particularly the royal family was inspired by Genghis Khan and the like Mongolian empire of that time. But like as she's describing architecture, it seems more like Middle Eastern, almost Moroccan in terms of inspiration. We're kind of a little all over the place. Anyway, Chaol arrives, he's grumpy. Nesryn is obviously with him, obviously. And like I said, Chaol has two jobs here. He needs to get his back fixed and he needs to get the southern continent to support Terrasen's efforts in the war. They need more troops. And Nesryn immediately starts to feel like more at home here than she does back in Ardelane. Like it is evident that she doesn't stick out here. She looks like the people around her, which is not something that is the case back in Ardelane. And she does have this like deep connection to this city and these people. And like she can feel it like almost immediately upon landing. We learn that Antica is called the God City in honor of the 36 gods that rule over the southern continent. So we don't know how many gods are ruling up north, but like there is a few gods up north and there is some overlap, but there's also some like differences. There's 36 of them down in the southern continent, and 36 because of that is like an important important number that will kind of like show up again and again in like architecture, design choices, things like that. They arrive and they notice that the palace is covered in these white strips of cloth. Like everything has these white strips of cloth tied to it, and Chaol is aware that this is a part of their funeral traditions here in the southern continent, and so he knows this means that someone has died. So they are pretty quickly taken into a meeting with the royal family. So we have the cognate, which is we have the current Kagan, who is like the emperor, the like boss man in charge, and his name is Eurus. And the way that this cognate works is that it's a meritocracy. It's not based on, the order of succession is not based on birth order or on gender in any way. It is based on the king selecting who he thinks would be the best heir to the throne. And so because of this, the king typically has like a fairly large family, so he has like a lot of options to choose from. And it also becomes often like a pretty dangerous thing to be a royal child because there's not this solidified role of succession. There's often a lot of like murdering of siblings. Can cause a lot of tension in the sibling groups. And Nesryn and Chaol arrive and expect to find 6 princes and princesses, but there are only 5. And they immediately like clock this and they're like, oh, this is a little weird. Nesryn is like mostly like overwhelmed that she's getting to meet the Kagan. He is this like figure that is almost considered like somewhat godlike in terms of the structure of the religion and of the southern continent, and is just known like also as like an incredibly wise and fair leader, and really important and very like admired by his people. And so Nesryn is like, wow, this is so cool that we get to meet him. So Chaol and Nesryn introduce themselves, explain why they're there, and Nesryn says, and she's not lying, this is like her truth, that being in this palace is the greatest honor of her life. She like kind of can't believe that she's here, and she like really wants to tell like her family back home about it because like again, they are connected to this place and she has the honor of like meeting with the Kagan. And he says to her in response, I assume you're here to try to get me to help with your war up north. And Chaol says, we are here on behest of my king who wants to trade and have peace, but also like help in the war would be lovely. Like we are here as ambassadors from Dorian. He just took over, so we're here to be like, hi. Also, well, we're here if I could get some help with my back, that'd be awesome blossom. Let's kind of go through the royal children. Some of these guys are going to be more important than others, but there are 5 of them. We're going to talk about all of them really briefly. So first we have Sartak, and he is the second born, but he is in charge of the rooks, all the rook riders, which is a large portion of their military. And rooks are these like big, they're like giant birds, essentially. They like look like eagles, and they're big enough, but they're like as big as horses and people can ride them. Fun. So he's in charge of this like aerial legion from the rooks. We love that. Also, they're big archers, which is fun because Nesryn also is a very good archer. And then we have Hussar, and Hussar is in charge of the armadas, so she's in charge of the sea forces. She is not married, but she does have like a partner. She's a girlfriend, which we love. And then we have Kashin. Kashin is in charge of the land army. So he's in charge of all the foot soldiers and the horse lords. He's a little bit more rugged, a little bit more rough around the edges. And he is in the furthest south. So they are all here at the palace for some reason. We'll talk about it in just a second. But normally they're kind of spread out. So normally Sartak kind of lives in the mountains that are off to the west, and Kashin lives in the city to the south where the militaries are stationed. I think Hussar actually does live in the palace or close to the palace because their armadas are stationed out of Antigua, I'm pretty sure. Then we have Argun. Argun is like the scholar. He's a politician amongst them, beloved by merchants and power brokers of the continent. Slender and tall, he was a scholar who traded not in coin and in finery, but in knowledge. The prince of spies, they called Argun. While his brothers had become the finest of warriors, Argun had honed his mind and now oversaw his father's 36 advisors. And again, Argun lives in the palace, so he's interacting directly with the Kagan every day, even when his siblings are not there. And then we have Duva, and Duva is the second youngest, and she's recently married and pregnant to a prince from the Eastern Islands. It's this island that we're told that is just like slightly south of Dorno, so like close to where Maeve is from. So Chaol and Nesryn show up and they're like, hi guys, we brought you presents. You're welcome. It's a bunch of jewels from Aelin, because it turns out Dorian's mom, Georgiana, actually stole all the Ardelane's riches before she left, which is a little rude. But it's okay. Aelin had a heck of jewels. And so she said, you can have my jewels to go give as a gift when you go to the southern continent, which was sweet of her. And Chaol says, a gift. Chaol declared, even as the Kagan himself leaned forward to examine the trove, from King Dorian Havilard of Ardelane and Aelin Galathinius, Queen of Terrasen. hussars. Yours kind of like perk up at that second name. They like are curious, but obviously they have spies up on the northern continent. They've been hearing word of like what's been happening in the northern continent. They know that the glass castle fell, but like it's hard to figure out exactly what's the deal. So it's interesting that these are from both royals. They're from both Dorian and Aelin. Duva starts kind of like looking through them. She like picks up a ring. She's like examining them, and then the Kagan Eurus says, "You're also an ambassador to Terrasen, correct?" And Chaol's like, "Yes." And Eurus is like, "I'm not sure if I want a 19-year-old running around ruling over Terrasen. Like, this is just like an assassin who has been given the crown, and she is 19. Like, I'm not sure if I feel confident in her ability to rule." At least Dorian, who's only a couple years older, has had like a ruler's education. Like, he grew up learning about how to rule. Okay, how much did he actually spend doing that? I don't know. And Chaol's like, "Well, I suppose some would say that years trained to be an assassin would be like some level of experience." Nesryn is embarrassed at this. Nesryn is like, "Oh my gosh, Chaol, you cannot talk back to the Kagan. Like, you are being so disrespectful and rude." But Eurus doesn't seem to be like kind of bothered by this. Eurus kind of goes on to say that like, "Okay, fine, whatever. We've heard of Selena Sarthothian, and like we know like of her tales of her time as an assassin. Like, maybe that is true, that some of that could be applicable to ruling. But my big question is like, why are you bringing gifts when no one even sent my daughter a wedding present? Like, my daughter just got married and no one even sent her a present, which is like super rude. Like, obviously you're coming to ask for my aid, but like things seem like they're a mess up north. Like, why would I jump in?" Like, it seems like often people would say the smartest move would be to stay out of it. And Chaol's like, "Well, like, some would consider it a noble cause. Like, up north, fighting for Terrasen and Ardelane, it's like the right thing to do." And Eurus says, "Actually, let me continue. Some might also say that I shouldn't even stay out of it, that I should ally with Duke Parrington, who has better odds in this war, because trade with him at the helm has been really profitable over the last few years. We know he's been in charge of Ardelane and has kind of taken over the empire, and like, honestly, things have been really profitable down here for us because of the trade agreements that he has arranged." But then he goes on to say, "Some would say that we risk allying with Parrington only to potentially face his armies in our harbors one day, that the shattered kingdoms of Elway and Fenharrow might again become wealthy under our new rule and fill our coffers with good trade. I have no doubt you will promise me that it shall be so. You will offer me exclusive trading deals, likely to your own disadvantage, but you are desperate, and there is nothing that you possess that I do not already own, that I cannot take if I wish." And then Eurus goes like, "Okay, like, I'm unwilling to agree to anything right now, but I will consider it while you see to your other purpose, while you are here to get healed. Like, my son Argon has already kind of informed me of your injuries and that they happened in the destruction of the glass castle." And he says, "It seems the Queen of Terrasen was not so careful about shielding her allies." Which is kind of rude. And actually, Chaol's injury is from the former king of Ardelane, Dorian's dad, not from Aelin. But he goes on, "You have permission to enter the tour, but the healers are the boss there, so they will decide if they want to work with you. Like, I cannot guarantee that they will work with you. I'm literally not the boss of them. I know I'm the boss of everyone in this empire, but the healers kind of run their own ship." And Chaol is like, "Okay, thank you. We'll take it. We'll take what we can get." And Eurus goes on, like, "Sleep here tonight, and then you can go see the healers in the morning. I will warn them that you are coming. Also, like, you can go ahead and take all those jewels back. I have no use for your gifts." And Chaol's like, why? Why won't you take our gifts?" And Nesryn realizes in that moment, like, clicks for her, that the reason that there are only 5. She realizes the youngest one is missing. She's only 17, and she like is like, "Oh, that's why there are funeral cloths everywhere, because this youngest princess died." And Nesryn is like, "Oh my gosh, we really messed up coming here while this family is clearly still in like the grieving process and asking these big things and like being like a little bit rude. Like, we really overstepped. It was very impolite." And Sartak goes on to confirm this. "Our beloved sister Melon died unexpectedly 3 weeks ago." And Chaol's like, "You have my deepest condolences." And Nesryn says, "May the northern winds carry her to fairer plains." And Chaol's like, "We've been at sea for the past 3 weeks. Like, we didn't hear. We would not have come here and been like, hey, help us, if we would have known what was going on." And Eurus is like, "Oh, in that case, I have some other news. If you haven't heard news lately because you've been on the ship, Rifthold has actually been sacked and King Dorian has fled and we don't know where he is." which obviously sends both of them into a spiraling panic. Nesryn is immediately thinking of her family who still lives in Rifthold, and she is so worried about them. She like hopes that they got out safely, but there's no way for her to know. Yeah, she's just like really anxious about this, and she like regrets coming. She like wishes she would have stayed back and stayed behind. And Chaol is obviously immediately thinking about Dorian. After this is sent to their rooms. They have kind of like a whole suite where they have like a shared sitting room and then 2 bedrooms off of either side. Nesryn's just kind of in shock over the news of Rifthold being sacked, and Chaol is just like mulling over the fact that he hadn't been there to protect Dorian. And he is glad to hear that Dorian like escaped somehow, but is, you know, still worried about him. And he starts thinking about Manon and wondering if she was involved, because like it would be like really helpful if she saved Dorian again. And he's like, I pray that we could be allies, and that maybe she would turn against Dorian. Because we had seen Manon a few times, right? We saw Manon, Chaol saw Manon when they went to rescue Lysandra in my favorite chapter of Queen of Shadows. And we also saw Manon again at Queen of Shadows when she was the one to be like, hey everyone, Dorian is still inside that boy. And so Chaol is hopeful that if the witches were the ones to sack Rifthold, that maybe Manon was able to kind of help out Dorian, and that maybe she's turning against Morinth, and that would be kind of fun and fresh. And Chaol's trying to manifest. He's trying to do his positive thinking. He's trying to keep his vibes good. And he's trying to be like, I'm sure Dorian is fine. He's like too smart to just get caught. Like, I'm sure he's fine. I'm sure he's fine. And then he's also starting to worry, because now he's in a worrying spiral. He starts to worry about Aelin because there is no news about where she is and what she's up to. And like, he would love to get some updates on what is happening in the war. While this is happening, Prince Cassian comes into Chaol's room, and he's like, hey, I just wanted to kind of chat with you and let you know that like injuries like yours are like fairly common here. We have a lot of people who ride horses quite regularly, and like spinal injuries from horseback riding, especially like in battle, are like fairly common, and the healers will probably be able to help you. And he's like, also, I would like to invite you to join the royal family every night at the high table for dinner. And Chaol's like, why? And he's like, well, Sartak and I are concerned that that there might be some spies at court for Parrington. Particularly, we are concerned that my sister's death was not an accident, that something malicious was happening from within the court. Apparently, we get the story that she jumped off a balcony, but the behavior was so unlike her. Like, that was not something that anyone would have expected from her. It seemed very, very out of character. And he wants just like an outsider's perspective on things, especially because Chaol is kind of aware and was watching what was happening in the northern continent. Nesryn has like gone to bed. She's like, I don't want to hang out with you. Anyway, so Chaol's alone in this room, and the servant comes in offering Chaol a bath with like a happy ending. Like, the servant is like, I'm at your beck and call. Anything you need, I'm here to help you. And Chaol's like, just the bath would be so gorge. I actually don't need any further help than that. So thank you so much. It's a weird vibe. I don't know why Sarah made the choice to make the servants also be like, do you want anything extra? We're all about hospitality here. Like, I just feel like it's kind of weird. And Chaol also kind of feels like it's weird. His bath is lovely, but he like spends the whole time thinking about Dorian and how Dorian wouldn't have just like abandoned his city. Like, he wouldn't have fled the city without cause unless it was like truly hopeless for him to remain. But he's like, I know that Dorian will find his way to allies. Like, Dorian is smart, Dorian is talented, Dorian is brave, Dorian will be okay. And then we also learn that Chaol and Nesryn have not been hooking up since his accident, because Chaol is like too self-conscious about his limitations. Like, the fact that he cannot move in bed in the same way that he would have before his accident has just like kind of ruined any of that. Even though they like shared a bed when they were on the 3-week ship down here, they didn't get up to any hanky-panky. Okay. But he's also like pretty good at like moving himself around. He's like pretty strong in terms of his upper body, so he's able to like pull himself in and out of the bath. He's able to like get himself in and out of his wheelchair and like into bed and things, but he cannot move from like his waist down. So there are definitely limitations to what he can do. Okay. Sparkly fingers. We're cheering, we're clapping, we're dancing. It's time for us to spend some time with Miss YRENE Towers. I love her so much. I love her so much. The girlies are all here. She's the last girlie to enter the villa. Then all the girlies are here. And the Throne of Glass girlies are top tier. No one can touch a Throne of Glass girl. No one can touch them. They are all spectacular, amazing, perfect, brilliant. And YRENE Towers is no exception. I love her so much. I'm so glad she's finally here in a real way. If you are a very astute careful reader of Throne of Glass, you will already know that we've met Irene in Assassin's Blade. We will chat about that more later. It becomes like more clear what story she comes from, so don't even worry. We'll chat more about Assassin's Blade and how that connects in, but like I'm so excited that we get Irene. Like Irene is worth this story. Even if you are a Chaol hater, like Irene is worth reading this book for. She's brilliant, amazing, so cool. So we come to find out YRENE Towers has been at the Tour Sesame for the last 2 years learning, and until she became top of her class. Like she didn't start in the beginning classes because her mother had taught her so much when she was growing up. She started in kind of like the middle classes and she like went to the top. She's giving Hermione Granger. Okay, like she's so smart, she's so talented, she's so amazing. And so she spent like 2 years working to the top of her class and working, studying until she's like really truly like the best in the tower. And we know now that she's an unknown healer's daughter from Fenharrow, was approached by healers old and young who had trained their entire lives for her advice and her assistance. Silba had granted her a gift, and a young stranger had given her another gift that final night in Inesh 2 years ago. Irene had no plans to waste either. I love that. So she has like really strong innate magic. We'll kind of learn more about. Like she's a pretty strong gift, but she's also like incredibly smart. And to the point that even healers that have been here much longer than her at the tower come to her for advice because she's just like so with it. We love her so much. Also, Silba is going to be like her goddess. We love to connect a girly to a goddess, and Silba is the like goddess of healing, and she is in both continents. That she's like a goddess that is recognized both in the northern and southern continents and is deeply connected to the healers in general, but particularly to Irene. So we meet Irene as she's in Hafiza's office, and Hafiza is the healer on high of the Tour Sesame. She's like the boss lady, the HBIC of the tour. And she's like working on some sort of elixir, and Irene is like offering her thoughts about like how she can make it brew faster. I don't know, they're like chatting. And Irene makes the comment that like every encounter with Hafiza was a learning opportunity. And then we kind of like learn a little bit more about the structure of the tour. So essentially there's like 2 groups of people that both study at the tour, which are the healers and the physicians. And healers like Irene have some level of innate magic, and they use their magical ability in congruence with kind of herbs and potions and, you know, medicines and things like that. And then we have the physicians. The physicians don't have access to magic, but they're going to go through a really similar education and become like medical doctors in some extent. And we get to know that like quick wit save lives more often than magic. Like their magic is helpful for sure, and we'll kind of see that. But more than that, it's like their knowledge and their ability to use their magic to guide their like treatment plans. That is helpful. We learn that Hafiza doesn't accept money from students, that there is no charge to enter the tour, but they essentially have to like work off their education by giving back to the community. So although they do not, there's no cost to attend, they, for the duration of their education, they are kind of committed to volunteer work within the community with healing whoever needs healed. But Irene is done with her education and she's ready to head back to Fenharrow. She's like passed all of her tests with flying colors, but Hafiza wants her to stay. Hafiza's like, stay here. I like think, although you're done with all your like formal education, I think there's still so much for you to learn. I think there's so much you could give back to the tour. But Irene knows about the war in the northern continent and wants to support Fenharrow in whatever way she can in their attempts at freedom. The reason she came down here to the tour was so she could learn enough to go back to Fenharrow and help her people and help the people that she like grew up around to live their best lives. We also learned that apparently Prince Cassian, who we met earlier, has a little friendship / romance with Irene. It's a little unclear. It seems like they had a friendship that he wanted to make a little bit more. She was not into that. That was not her vibe. And Irene is a little worried that he is going to attempt to make her stay with his royal influence. Like, if he decrees she can't leave, like, she can't leave. So she needs to be kind of subtle about her exit. She can't, like, make a big deal of it. And we also learned that she's kind of, like, friends with the royals in general. She's good friends with Hussar as well, one of the princesses, and Hussar's girlfriend, Raina. But Irene has been kind of avoiding them for a while now because, again, she wants to keep things friendly, and he seems a little too interested in romance. Anyway, Hafiza is like, before you decide whether to stay or go, I have a patient for you. A guest at the palace, Mr. Chaol, who is paralyzed. And Hafiza kind of explains a little bit about what she knows about his injury, and Irene immediately like understands that this is going to be a very complex task that will take weeks to months to heal. Like, it's not going to be like she can pop by the palace tomorrow, fix him up, and then get on the next boat out of here. Like, this will be a long process. And Irene is like, has some follow-up questions, obviously, if she's going to be working on this guy for a few weeks. She's like, who is it? Who do you want me to heal? And Hafiza says, Lord Chaol Westfall, former captain of the guard and now hand to the king of Ardalan. And YRENE is like, I won't do that. Like, I'm not going to help the former captain of the guard and now current hand to the king of Ardalan. Ardalan is the kingdom who like destroyed her family, who killed her mother and left her an orphan. And Hafiza's like, you took an oath to help like whoever needed helping. And YRENE is like, no, like this is my line. I'm absolutely not doing it. And Hafiza goes, if you see Ardalanian soldiers suffering on that battlefield, will you stomp right over them? Like when you go north and you see people suffering that are from Ardalan, you're going to see them like quite regularly up there. Will you just say, not my problem? And YRENE says, he used to work for the king and now he works for his son. Do you know what those king's men did all these years ago? What his armies, his soldiers, his guards did. And you asked me to heal the man who commanded him. Like, she's like, this is not just any random Ardalanian man. This is a man who is probably directly connected to the forces that like ruined my life. And Hafiza is like, it is a reality of who we are, a choice all healers must make. And YRENE goes on, and you have made it so often with your peaceful kingdom. YRENE is like, excuse me, Hafiza, who are you healing that's your enemy? Like, what's going on? And Hafiza goes on to tell the story of being asked to heal this man who had committed a bunch of major crimes. It is kind of implied that he had probably assaulted many women over the course of weeks, and he is caught and like gravely injured. And Hafiza was like, I almost killed him. Like it would have been so easy for me to, instead of like using my magic to heal a wound, to open an artery and just let him bleed out and be like, oh, couldn't help him. Like no one would have been the wiser. But I remembered my oath and I wanted to make sure he was alive so that his victims could see justice being served. And she says, you know, after that, a few days later, he was executed for his crimes. He was found guilty and he was executed, and like they got their justice. And YRENE says, so I am to heal this man so that he may find justice elsewhere. Like, okay, that kind of seems silly, Hafiza. And Hafiza says, you do not know his story, YRENE. I suggest listening to it before contemplating such things. Hafiza watched her for a long moment. The day you walked into this room, so terribly thin and covered with the dust of 100 roads, I had never sensed such a gift. I looked into those beautiful eyes of yours, and I nearly gasped at the uncut power in you. Disappointment. It was disappointment on the healer on high's face in her voice. I thought to myself, Hafiza went on, where has this young woman been hiding? What gods reared you, guided you to my doorstep? Your dress was in tatters around your ankles, and yet you walked in, straight backed as any noble lady, as if you were heir to Kamala herself. Even your family name Towers, a hint at your foremothers' long ago association with a tour, perhaps. I wondered in that moment if I had at last found my heir, my replacement. I asked you what you wanted to do with the knowledge I would give you, Hafiza went on. Do you remember what you said to me? YRENE did. She had not forgotten it, not for a moment. I said I wanted to use it to do some good for the world, to do something with my useless, wasted life. The words had guided her these years, alongside the note she carried every day, moving it from pocket to pocket, dress to dress, words for a mysterious stranger, perhaps a god who had worn the skin of a battered young woman, whose gift of gold had gotten her here, saved her. And so you shall, YRENE, Hafiza said. You shall one day return home, and you shall do good. You shall do wonders. But before you do, I would ask this of you. Help that young man. You have done the healing before. You can do it again now. Okay, let's go ahead and get the cry count going. I did strike one. This is like the connection to Assassin's Blade. We'll go through it in just like a second here. But I just find this so incredibly beautiful. I love it so much. Like she fits right in with everyone else because she just like thinks that her life is useless and wasted. Just like all of our girlies. All of our girlies are like, our lives are meaningless, and then they find purpose in their lives by helping and being good people to others. Again, this is a plead. It's not too late. It's not too late. What are we, 30 minutes into this video? If you are watching this video instead of reading Tower of Dawn, it's not too late. I truly think the book is like the thesis statement of the series. Like I think it does such a beautiful job because although Aelin isn't present in this book, and we do miss her dearly, okay? We miss Aelin, we miss Manon, we miss little Abraxas. We get her kindness and her presence in YRENE in this really beautiful way that Celaena Sarthothia, not even Aelin, before Aelin even stepped back into her power, that Celaena Sarthothian's, her kindness changed the world. And I think it's just like intensely powerful, and that I think you're doing a disservice to yourself if you're skipping this book. Still, YRENE isn't convinced. She's still not convinced. She knows that she, like, agreed to do good, but, like, this is just too hard. Can't they send someone else? And hafiza says to her, it is a soul wound, YRENE. And letting it fester all these years, I cannot blame you, but I will hold you accountable. And if you let it turn into something worse, I will mourn you for it. Like, she's like, girly, this is an injury deep in yourself. This is an emotional, mental wound that, like, you need to take the time to heal before you leave this place, because it will just get worse and it might destroy you. She goes on to say, you passed the test better than anyone who has ever climbed into that tower, hafiza said softly. But let this be my personal test for you, the final one, so that when you decide to go, I may bid you farewell, send you off to war, and know, hafiza put a hand on her chest, know that wherever the road takes you, however dark, you will be all right. YRENE slid a hand into her pocket of her pale blue dress, her fingers wrapping around the familiar smoothness of the folded piece of parchment. She clutched it as she had often done on the sailing over here, during those initial few weeks of uncertainty, even after hafiza had admitted her during the long hours and hard days and moments that had nearly broken her while she trained. A note written by a stranger who had saved her life and granted her freedom in a matter of hours. YRENE had never learned her name. That young woman who had worn her scars like some ladies wore their finest jewelry. That young woman who was a trained killer had purchased a healer's education. So many good things had come from that night. YRENE sometimes wondered if it actually had happened, might have believed that she had dreamed it if not for the note in her pocket. And the second object, YRENE had never sold, even when the gold had thinned. The ornate gold and ruby brooch worth more than the entire blocks of Antica. Ardaleine's colors. YRENE had never learned where the young woman had come from, who had bestowed the beating that had left that lingering bruises on her pretty face, but she had spoken of Ardalaine as YRENE did. As all children who had lost everything to Ardalaine did. Those children with their kingdoms left in ash and blood and ruin. YRENE ran a thumb over the note as in the words inked there. For wherever you need to go, and then some. The world needs more healers. 911. Somebody call for help. Oh my gosh. That's my favorite. It's my literal favorite. I know I say that all the time. But this is my favorite connection back to Assassin's Blade. It's one of my just like favorite little nuggets in this book is the fact that YRENE, way back in Assassin's Blade, was given this note from Aelin. That was given this note from Aelin. When Aelin didn't know who YRENE would become. YRENE didn't know who Aelin was. Aelin was not even like in acceptance of who she would become. I'm gonna talk more about it, probably ad nauseum. You're probably gonna be sick of me talking about how like Selena as an assassin, this woman who was like living in the luxury of Ardalaine, looked at YRENE and said, the world needs more healers. Ugh. Anyway, this is finally enough to convince YRENE to take Chaol on. She says, okay, I'll assess him and then I'll decide if I'm going to heal him. And hafiza is like, fair enough. Like, fair enough, you can meet him. You can suss out how long this is going to take before you decide for sure. Like, that's cool. And the plan is for YRENE to see it tomorrow. Time travel trip. We're going to go like a super quick refresher of what happened in Assassin's Blade. Let's all take a moment to recognize the glow up the slides have had since the Assassin's Blade days. This is essentially the slides. I like mess with them slightly, but like this is essentially the slides from Assassin's Blade. But I was much more concise. The entirety of Assassin's Blade was 88 slides. I'm already 27 slides in for this book, and we're like 2 chapters in. Embarrassing. So, we get the story of Selena showing up in this small port town called Anesh, and she's completely black and blue, covered in just like bruises. She had recently returned from her adventures in Skulls Bay with Sam, where she like messed with Rolf and freed a bunch of slaves. When she got back to Ardalaine, Arobynn obviously had been mad at her and he like beat her half to death. Great. And now she's getting sent to the Red Desert as like training punishment. She's going on a training trip. Okay. But she has to stop in Anesh overnight so she can take a boat to the Red Desert the next day. YRENE works at this inn, and a group of men attack YRENE in this alleyway, and Selena's the one that saves her life. Selena comes in and saves her, and as then afterwards, YRENE is like tending to Selena's wounds. She got injured a couple times. Also, she's like bruised, and so YRENE is just trying to like help her out, and she explains that she wants to be a healer and train in the southern continent, but she like doesn't have enough money and has just kind of been like stuck in Anesh for like years now because she doesn't have enough money to take the boat and get down to the tour. She wants to go down to the tour and then come back and help people and like help Fenharrow. And Selena kind of like sees herself in this story of a girl whose life was destroyed by Ardalaine, whose village and family was just like burnt to the ground by Ardalaine, and recognizes that going to become a healer is such a noble cause. And so Selena teaches her some self-defense. She says, first of all, we can really avoid these boys coming and trying to beat you up if I just teach you a couple things. And so he teaches her self-defense. And Irene is like, oh my gosh, what can I give you in return for this like gift of you teaching me all these things that are incredibly helpful? And Selena says the only thing that she wants in return is like, if you get the chance, teach it to any female who will take the time to listen, which is like beautiful. And they like hang out. A few more things happen that are unimportant. And then when Selena leaves, she leaves a note for Irene along with a bunch of gold and that brooch. And the note is the one that she still has in her pocket that says like, the world needs more healers. And it's like enough money and jewels for her to make the journey to the southern continent and then some. We're going to read you the like ending of this section. She hoped that an assassin's jewels would pay for a healer's education. And with that note that said, for wherever you need to go, and then some, the world needs more healers. And Irene has kept that in her pocket for the past 2 years. She's kept this note. It is like her personal mission statement. That night at dinner, they're invited, Nesryn and Chaol are invited to sit at the high table with the royal family. And Chaol is still trying to like suss out the vibes. He's like kind of confused by the city because the vibes are like so different than Rifthold. Like it's much less buttoned up, like there's a little bit more like freedom, but there's also like a lot of emphasis on like learning, and there's a blend of a lot of different cultures and history, and there's a sense of like peacefulness. Like there's not the tension that just like is permeated into Rifthold. Anyway, they're at dinner, and Argun, the one who Chaol calls the oily one, so everyone's favorite, obviously, kind of spends the night like asking Chaol about like the slavery practices of Ardalan, which like makes Chaol kind of uncomfortable because like obviously he knows slavery isn't cool, but like he was like kind of not doing anything to stop it until like quite recently when Selena was like, hey, or I guess Aelin, when Aelin was like, hey, slavery isn't cool. Remember how I was a slave? That was bad. And he's like, yeah, I guess so. He's learning, he's growing. Argon, they don't have slavery down on the southern continent, and Argon is like asking a lot of questions because he seems kind of like confused by the brutality of the slavery that was practiced down in Rifthold. And so he just like has questions, comments, concerns. Meanwhile, Chaol is also trying to keep his eyes peeled for the Valg, any Valg influence that might be happening in court at all. He hasn't spotted any. He's like on the lookout for collars or rings, but like hasn't seen any of those. But that doesn't mean like something isn't going on. But in general, like the food is delicious. The Kagan gives a toast to his guest, and everyone is like fairly welcoming, even though clearly they're still like in the grieving process. Nesryn, meanwhile, is being weird and has been weird all at dinner, probably because she's worried about her family. You know how like Rifthold was sacked, and we know nothing about what happened to the Philippe family. Yeah, maybe she's worried about that. But Chaol does not pick up on this. Bless his sweet little heart. He has no idea why Nesryn is kind of upset. He's the dumbest little nugget. And then that night they go back to their room, and Chaol's like, do you want to sleep in my room or your room? And Nesryn just like walks in her room alone and is like, LOL. She's like, bestie, I need some space from you. You're bothering me. The next morning, Chaol didn't sleep at all because he's very nervous about his meeting with the healer this morning. The healer is coming to them. She arrives about like 10 minutes late. Nesryn is like starting to get antsy. Chaol is like, you need to chill out. You need to relax. And Nesryn is like, every day counts, every minute counts. We are not where we are supposed to be because we are here, and like I need to get back to Rifthold and like make sure my family is fine. Chaol's like, oh, you're worried about your family. That's why you're being a little weird. I finally get it. And he suggests that she go into town and like look for her like in town family. So like obviously not her like immediate family, but she has like uncles here, and like see if maybe they've gotten word. Nesryn at first is like, it's okay, like I can wait, I came here to help you, like I don't need to go immediately, I just like a sense of urgency would be nice. The moment Irene walks in, Chaol is like, oh my gosh, she's the most beautiful, gorgeous thing I've ever seen. She probably stops people in the streets because she's so stunning and people want to look at her. Irene, on the other hand, is mad. She's in a bad mood immediately. She reaches into her pocket to squeeze the note. Chaol catches her like touching something in her pocket, and he's like, interesting. But we know it's the note that she has in her pocket from Aelin. The dramatic irony in this book. The use of dramatic irony where we know something that the characters don't know in this book is truly top tier. Truly top tier. It's good in Empire Storms too, where it's just like good. There's a couple moments where we get some like dramatic irony as far as like what's happening in Empire Storms versus what's happening here. That is like truly one of the best. I will mention it because it's like the if you're gonna do the tandem read for one reason, it's this one moment in this book that I will mention when we get to, because it is truly top tier. But I also love this, and it lasts for like a while, where we know that this woman that was this like stranger that like gifted Irene this healer's education, and something that Irene is just like really formed her life around this like moment with this stranger is Selena Sarthothian, who is Aelin Galathinius, and obviously someone who has close ties to Chaol, and the fact that essentially like Aelin sent YRENE and Chaol to each other. Stop, if only she knew the girl who wrote that note sent him to her. Like, if only she knew. But YRENE is not here for small talk. She is like no nonsense. She's grumpy. She's so mad she's having to help Chaol. And she starts to just like ask Chaol like the standard sort of questions. Clearly she's grumpy. And Chaol's like, if you don't want to be here, then send someone else. Like, you're being so rude right now. And Nesryn is like, shut up, Chaol. We're not sending someone else. Remember, sense of urgency. She's here. She's asking questions. We don't need her to like you. Okay? It's hard to like you sometimes, honestly. A lot of people, turns out, don't like you. So just let her do her work. Shut up. YRENE then says in response to that, there is no one else to do this. The unspoken word said the rest. They sent their best. YRENE is like, I'm the best. She doesn't say that, but like, it's implied. She's the best. Like, there's no one else that they should send. While she's in there, Hasar walks in and she's like, oh my gosh, hi, YRENE. And she's like, immediately is like, YRENE, why are you being so cranky today? I've never seen you this cranky before in your life. Also, we invited you to dinner and you didn't come yesterday. And YRENE is like, I was working. And Hasar's like, typical YRENE. Don't you worry, Chaol. She is very talented and will have you back on your feet very soon. She like just comes in to say this and then she like pieces out again. That's the first time Chaol has actually heard her name, because Chaol asked her name, but she was like too busy being grumpy to supply them. And Chaol's like, YRENE Towers. And YRENE's like, yeah, that's my name. Don't wear it out. Okay, you know my name now. Don't make it weird. And again, just like continues these like questions, getting quite personal about like what has been specifically affected and has his manhood been affected. And Chaol is like a little shy about talking about his downstairs region with this random lady who low-key hates him, and he can sense that vibe. Nesryn starts to like answer questions for him. He doesn't love that either. Like, the vibes are Chaol is having a bad time, but he's pushing through. And then she asks him to take off his boots, and Chaol's like, should I take off my pants too? YRENE responds, after a drink or two, I think. Then she apologizes, because that's not super appropriate, but a hilarious joke. Anyway, she says sorry and instructs it at Nesryn. And Chaol's like, why are you apologizing to her? And YRENE says, I assume she has the misfortune of sharing your bed these days. And Chaol's like, literally, what have I done to you? Like, have I done something to offend you that I didn't realize? And YRENE is like, no. And Chaol's like, well, obviously she's lying because this girl clearly hates me. He scanned YRENE for any sort of flickering magic. What it looked like, he had not the faintest inkling. Dorian had been ice and wind and flashing light. Aelin's had been raging, singing flame. But healing magic, was it something external, something tangible, or something only his bones and blood might witness? He'd once balked at these sort of questions, might have even balked at the idea of letting magic touch him. But the man who had done those things feared those things. He was glad to leave him in the shattered ruins of that glass castle. This man has grown. He has grown and changed, and he is better. He is better. He is getting better every day. He's improving every day. He's like making strides to be a better person. And if you refuse to see that, I think that says more about you than it says about Chaol at this point. Anyway, YRENE has him lay down so she can better assess his injuries. And she's like, okay, I need to like talk with my superiors before I decide what we're gonna do next. And she thinks to herself, like, that's not actually true. Like, I guess I will talk with hafiza, but like, I get to decide what's happening next. And Nesryn asks her, like, as she's getting ready to leave, is it bad? And YRENE is like, you know it's bad. And Nesryn goes, but you can help him. And YRENE goes on, I have healed such injuries before, but this, it remains to be seen. And Nesryn goes, when will you know? And YRENE says, when I've had time to think. And Chaol realizes in that moment that she means time to decide. She hasn't decided whether she's going to help Chaol or not. And Nesryn's like, when will you be back? And YRENE's like, I don't know. I'll send word when I'm coming back, so don't even worry. Serena's like, I just want to know what's going on. My family is like maybe being murdered up north. And I would just like to get a 411 about like what's happening. And then YRENE leaves, and Nesryn like follows her out, and she sees that she left behind a piece of paper. And then it just has a list of names. Ognia, Marte, Rosanna, and Josephine. It was the final name that had been written down several times, the final name that had been underlined over and over again. Josephine, Josephine, Josephine. What do you think it means? Nesryn asked Chaol. And Chaol's like, maybe it's a list of healers that she thinks might be able to help me. But Chaol immediately knows that's not true. It had come out that she was from Fenharrow, and he like is aware of another healer from Fenharrow, Sorsha, and he knows what YRENE likely endured when she grew up in Fenharrow, and knew that was likely a list of the name of people she wanted to remember as she worked on Chaol, and knows that her resistance to working with Chaol is because he worked for the King of Ardelayne, and knows that there must be like a tremendous like tension there. And Chaol thinks to himself, like, there's no way she's coming back. Like, there's no way she's coming back. Then we catch up with YRENE and see what she was thinking, and YRENE is like kind of embarrassed of how she behaved. She had never been so unprofessional before. She was like late, and then things just got worse from there. She is thinking that that list that she was like, as she was asking those questions to Chaol, she was pretending to write down the answers, but she was actually writing that list of names, which was the last 4 generations of Towers women. It was just like something to ground herself in. It was almost like an apology to these women that she was even like toying with the idea of helping this man. And she like feels very torn, and she goes into Hafiza's office, but Hafiza is meeting with like a crying girl, and she's like, you gotta wait in the hall, okay? I'm dealing with this girly. I'll talk to you in a minute. And so YRENE is in the hallway, and she's just thinking about Chaol and how he like wasn't as terrible as she thought, but like, you know, he wasn't great. Finally the girl is done, and she steps out into the hallway, and YRENE stops her as she's like exiting Hafiza's office, and she's like, she thinks to herself remembering how hard those first days are when you like have no one to sit with, you don't know anyone, and you're in this brand new place. And she like says, okay, here's the deal. You're gonna go to Cook, and you're gonna tell Cook that I need 6 almond cookies because I smelled them when I was coming in. I know she's baking them. They're delish. You're gonna take 4 for yourself, and you're gonna leave 2 for me. And she like mused on the fact that like Cook was like one of her first relationships here, and recently she had saved her daughter from a lung infection, so like Cook owes her, and so she knows Cook will pass on those cookies. And then Hafiza calls her into the office, and Hafiza is like, hey, how did that go? Like, can you heal him? And YRENE is like, yes, but I behaved quite poorly. Like, I am embarrassed at how I behaved with him. Like, I'm embarrassed to admit it. And Hafiza's like, so do better next time. Like, you're gonna return, right? And YRENE is like, yes, I was the one who behaved badly, not him. I will heal him, if only for the fact that Ardelayne can't hold this against me. Like, I don't want to go back and then be like the thing that pushes Ardelayne over the edge against me. In fact, I did not heal this hand of the king, so I will do it for that. It's a political choice. And they talk about Nesryn and how YRENE is so unclear about how like Nesryn, this woman who her family is clearly not from Ardelayne, it could serve that evil empire. Like, Hafiza is like, maybe it means that there's more to the story. Like, if Nesryn, who like seemed like a kind woman whose family is not even from there, could work with this young man, maybe like he's not as terrible as you might think. YRENE is like, well, I'm pretty sure that like Chaol himself is not like an evil man. He like seemed pretty chill, and okay, but she's not ready to forgive him for being complicit with the empire. Like, even if he wasn't objectively evil, he still was like complicit in a lot of the actions the empire took. Like, he must have in order to serve the formal king. And she goes on to explain that there's like this residual evil, dark, cold magic remaining in his spine that's unlike anything she's ever seen before, and she needs to head to the library to do some research. Meanwhile, back with Chaol and Nesryn, the healer doesn't return the next day, and Nesryn is just like anxious that like maybe they came all this way and like nothing's gonna happen, and she's just like pacing around, and Chaol's like, maybe you should go see your family. Like, we don't have anything else on the agenda for today. Like, go see your family and then come back here, okay? Gives you something to do rather than just like bothering me. He doesn't say the bothering me part, but it's kind of implied. And so Nesryn leaves, but like promises to be back by dinner. And as she's cruising through the palace hallway, she bumps into Sartak, and she's conscientious of being nice to him because he might be an in to get them aid for Harrison and Ardelayne in the war. Like, the presumed heir, again, no one knows kind of who the Kagan is going to pick. It is actually like sealed in a safe, essentially, on a piece of paper that is only able to be opened once the Kagan has died. But he's presumed to be the heir because he is the leader of the Rock Army, the aerial forces, and so like it's important that we befriend him, because he could be a really helpful ally. And he tells her that he's headed to ride his rook, but then he offers to escort her to her family's house instead. He's like, the city can be like really confusing, like I'd be happy to escort you. And Nesryn is like, oh my gosh, that is so sweet, but I am actually totally fine. No, thank you. And Sartak is like, okay, at least let me accompany you to the gate. And they like chat, they spend the walk chatting about YRENE and how she has a connection to Caution. Sartak is like, yeah, they maybe had a little bit of a thing once. But also assures her that like recently, again, YRENE has healed like a very similar injury, so like probably she's gonna be able to heal Chaol. And he tells the story of how he became a rook rider. And it turns out when he was 12, he was with his father, had taken him down to the mountains to see the aerial forces. And he snuck away and rode off on the captain's rook. Snuck off, rode on the captain's rook. When he came back, his dad was so mad because just riding on a rook for the first time is incredibly dangerous, because if you fall, you will die because you're really high up in the air, obviously. And as punishment, he had him live amongst the rookin, which are the people who ride the rooks. And during that time, Kadara, his rook, had hatched when I was 15, and I raised her myself, and I have had no other mount since. And so from the time he was 15, he had a rook of his own and has been a pretty regular rook rider. But he spent his teenage years in the mountains living amongst the rookin people. And this whole story kind of makes Nesryn a little bit sad that she's even asking him to go into battle, because clearly he has such a deep connection to his rook. She knows it would be really dangerous, and there's this level of just an awareness of what she's asking from him, that she's asking him to put himself and the people and birds, I guess, that he loves in danger too. Anyway, he walks her to the gate and then again offers to escort her, but she again declines, and he's like, hey, you should come with me on a flight one time. I think it could be fun. Meanwhile, back with our boy Chaol, he waited until the moment Nesryn left and then immediately calls for his serving girl, Katja, the one who helps him into his bath earlier. She's his personal servant girl and is just all around. He asked her, hey, could you possibly do some recon for me and go down to the docks and see if they know anything about what's happening in Rifthold? I just would love a little bit more information if you could gather it for me. Okay? And she's like, for sure. I'll go do that right now, my friends. But on the way, he has Katja drop him off at Argon's room, which includes a cool courtyard, which has 2 peacocks in it, 2 white peacocks. Okay, fun, fresh. The palace is sick. This palace is way cooler than the glass castle. No offense to the glass castle. Anyway, they make small talk about the peacocks for a little bit, and Argon talks about how at his other house he has a whole bunch of peacocks, but this is what he has here. And Chaol is I cannot believe we were talking about peacocks right now while there's a war happening up north, and I don't know where Dorian is. This seems silly, but you gotta do the song and dance. And finally Argon's I bet you want to know about your city. And Chaol's yes, please, any information you can give me will be so helpful. And Argon's well, I can't tell you anything. In fact, even being seen with you is kind of dangerous for me politically, and sends a message that I'm not sure I want to send. So I need you to leave. But everything we've said so far is true. The city was sacked and Dorian fled. And Chaol's okay, that was so unhelpful. Thanks, bestie. That night, Chaol goes to dinner, and Nesryn still isn't back. She was supposed to be back from dinner. That's the time she said she was going to be back, but she's not back yet. Chaol is getting a little anxious, a little worried. Remember my little anxious control freak boy? This is his literal worst nightmare. Dorian is back home. He doesn't know where he is. He can't help him, even if he is not in a country to help him. 2, even if he were to get able to get back there, he is still in a position where he really can't navigate the world well. He is still he's very limited by the fact that he is in a wheelchair and in a world that is got a lot of stairs in it. And now Nesryn, the girl that was with him, is gone, and he doesn't know where she is, and he is spiraling because, again, this world has a lot of stairs in it, and he does not know how to navigate the world as a man who is in a wheelchair. And he feels very stuck and very he feels very incompetent. It's only been a month since his injury, and so he's really hasn't grappled with it in any capacity yet, and he's just spiraling because he knows that if Valg are here, they're certainly going to be hunting for Nesryn and Chaol, because Nesryn and Chaol have the most information about the Valg, and so that is very dangerous. But in the midst of his spiraling, YRENE shows up for dinner and is warmly greeted by Hasar and her girlfriend, and Chaol immediately catches on to the fact that Kashan is a little overpossessive to YRENE. He doesn't really talk to her, but he's giving off vibes. Kashan starts bragging about how YRENE is the best healer that the tour has ever seen, even though she's only been there for 2 years and she got the best possible marks on her exam. And he's just talking about how gorgeous and brilliant and talented she is. And YRENE starts listening, obviously, because they're talking about her just on the other end of the table. Looks over and the vibes are uncomfy, and Chaol's uncomfy because it's weird. The vibes are weird. And Chaol tries to change the topic to Kashan's usual work, which is living down south and training the land troops. But after Chaol asks a couple questions about the troops, because honestly this is helpful information for him to have, Argon is stop, we don't talk about business and politics at the dinner table. Argon is I'm on to you, Chaol. And then YRENE looks over at Chaol, and Chaol knows that she's noticed Nesryn's absence, and he like really hopes she doesn't say anything because she doesn't want to draw attention to Nesryn's absence because she doesn't know if she can trust like the royal family yet. Like things are a little tense and he doesn't want to, one, make them seem like kind of messy and vulnerable, but also like put Nesryn in a dangerous spot. Caution keeps trying to chat with YRENE now, but she's like literally shutting it down immediately every time. Like YRENE is trying without saying anything to be like, no, not interested. It's not working. Chaol heads back to his room. He gets ready for bed. He's in bed and Nesryn is still not back. And he like waits up for her and she doesn't actually return until like 1 o'clock in the morning. And Chaol is cranky that she like got back so late. He's been so anxious. He's just, this anxiety's been building up with him since, you know, probably like 5 p.m. So we've had like 7-8 hours of anxiety built up. So now he's in a bad mood. And Nesryn is like, hey, sorry I missed dinner. And Chaol is like, do you know how worried I've been? Nesryn says, immediately sensing the hostile vibes and like being like, no, didn't realize I needed to clear my comings and goings with you. And Chaol is like, we are in a foreign city and you didn't return when you said you would. And Nesryn says, it's not foreign to me. Like this is a city I've, one, been to before. Like I've visited with my family, but two, like my family lives here. This is kind of the city where I'm from in some respects, even though I have never like lived here formally. And Chaol's like, a princess was murdered here a few days ago. Like it's dangerous for you to just be out and about. And Nesryn says, we don't even know that she was murdered. Like the official ruling is that she was not murdered, that it was not, there was no foul play in her death. The princes are just like a little suspicious. And Chaol says, I couldn't even come looking for you. And this is really where all the spiraling comes from. He feels so incredibly helpless. Like nothing feels like it's in his control. Everything is going wrong. He can't protect the people he loves, Nesryn, Dorian. He can't keep them safe. He has no like ability to know what will be happening next with him as far as his injury. Like, is he going to be able to walk again? Will his legs work? Will YRENE help him? Does it matter? And like, there's just like literally nothing within his control. And so he's just like a spiraling little baby nugget. Okay. Anxious boys are anxious. And Nesryn is like, my family was glad to see me. And they received word that my father made it out, in case you're wondering. She's like, in case you're wondering, I know you've been worried only about you and how worried you've been, but like, everything was lovely. And Chaol's like, I'm glad to hear that. This thing between us doesn't work if you don't tell me where you are or if your plans change. Like, I just need you to tell me where you are. Which I do think is reasonable. I do think both of them are like kind of well within their rights in this conversation. Like Nesryn probably should have sent word, but like she also was in a spot where she like wasn't that dangerous, you know? Like Chaol is being a little overprotective. Nesryn goes on to explain, I was just at their house eating dinner. I lost track of time and they begged me to stay with them. And Chaol says, you know better than not to send word, not after the shit we've been through. And Nesryn says, I have nothing to fear in this city, in this place. And then she goes to bed. Like, she feels like she's in a much safer place. That Rifthold, she was constantly in danger. Like because she stuck out, because she was not like ethnically from Rifthold, and the fact that she was different really made her stand out and made her a target. And also she was a rebel, and that like made her a target, and the Valg presence was much heavier there. And here she like feels safe, she feels at home. She kind of doesn't understand the level of worry Chaol has. And because Chaol's worry is largely not based on like the reality of Nesryn being in danger, although that is something he's worried about, but more about the fact that if something were to happen to her, there was really nothing he could do about it. The next morning, we jump in with YRENE. She is heading back to the palace this morning, and she, on her walk there, she's thinking about Passion and how he will hopefully leave the palace and go back to the southern city where he spends most of his time because he's annoying her. She understands that if she were to like enter a relationship with Caution, it would mean that she had to commit herself to like the royal family here, and it means she could not go back up north, and like that's not something she's willing to do. It's not even something she's willing to entertain. So there's no reason for her to even enter into a romantic relationship with Caution because like she's got other stuff to do. She's a busy girl. She arrives at the palace to see Chaol and Nesryn, and the vibes are like really tense. She can tell like something happened between Nesryn and Chaol because like cranky pants McGee vibes are weird between them. And YRENE tells Chaol that she'll try to help him. She's like, okay, I've decided that I will help you. And Chaol is just like sitting there stoically and silent. And Nesryn starts asking questions like, will this take hours every day? And YRENE is like, yes, I suggest you like probably should go like work on other stuff while I help him. Like if you have other projects that you need to work on while you're here, like go ahead and do it because like I'm going to be healing him for literally hours every day. And it's going to take a while. And Nesryn's like, what if you need help moving him? And YRENE is like, from what I've seen, Chaol is like pretty capable of moving himself around in any capacity that I would need. Chaol at this point now has gotten annoyed, and he's like, Nesryn, I can ask my own question. Like, just because my legs aren't working doesn't mean I can't ask questions, okay? And then Nesryn's like, okay, fine. She is like, I'm gonna leave then and go work on my own stuff. And she keeps things very, very vague as she's like leaving, not saying exactly what she's doing. And YRENE, as soon as she's out of the room, is like, that's probably a good idea for you guys to keep things vague. The servants in this palace are almost all spies that will give information to royals anytime they get a chance. And Chaol's like, yeah, I kind of figured. And then YRENE goes on and is like, hey, do you own any slaves back in Ardelayne? Like, talking about servants made her think of slaves. Girlie's just like out here being like, I need to make sure this boy doesn't have any extra red flags that I'm not aware of. You know, like, I need to be made aware of all red flags at the top of the hour. And Chaol is like, no, I believe in paying people for their work, and I believe in a human intrinsic right to freedom. And YRENE is like, oh, that's so interesting. You served a king who didn't believe in any of those things. That seems, you know, counterintuitive. And Chaol says, no, I served his son, Dorian, my bestie bro, the best man I know. The first thing Dorian did when he became king was to shut down the slave trade. Like, my bestie bro is not about slavery. And YRENE is like, yeah, but you worked for the king as far as you were captain of the guard under the former king's rule. And Chaol says, there are choices in my past that I have come to regret, but I can only move on and attempt to fix them. Fight to make sure they do not occur again. He jerked his chin towards the supplies she'd set down, which I cannot do while in this chair. And YRENE goes, you certainly could do such things from that chair, she said tartly and meant it. Like, this chair does not prohibit you from all active, like, you can still talk, you can still do politics, you can still do a lot of things. This chair is, like, not as limiting as you would like to make it out to be. YRENE makes Chaol lie down on the couch. They were, like, on his bed last time, but since Nesryn isn't there, she, like, wants to keep things more appropriate. It's important to her that everyone feels safe and secure in this situation, and she would feel more safe and secure if they were on the couch, because they're alone together. And she doesn't want people to get the wrong idea. And Chaol thinks back to the way that Caution looked at YRENE during that dinner and understands that Caution is, like, definitely a factor in this decision, and making sure that, like, Caution doesn't get word that, like, Chaol and YRENE are, like, hooking up, you know? And then Chaol is like, hey, do you have any interest in Caution? Like, is the thing between you and Caution, like, a thing that's happening? And YRENE says, I have no plans to seek such a life for myself. And also, it's none of your concern. And Chaol is like, it's probably because, like, being the wife to a royal is, like, pretty dangerous, like I mentioned, because it's a meritocracy. There is kind of, like, a lot of tension over who will get the throne, and a lot of times there is murder that happens between the siblings and also between their children and their wives. YRENE does admire the shirtless Chaol for a second. It's very clear that he is still exercising to the best of abilities because he is still incredibly well muscled, but she realizes as she starts to feel him that his legs are starting to atrophy. The muscles in his legs are already, like, weakening, already, like, shrinking. They shrink pretty quickly. And YRENE explains the plan to, like, exercise his whole body so that his muscles will be able to support him once he is able to stand again. That part of that will be continuing to maintain his upper body and his, like, core strength, but also doing exercises to maintain some level of muscle in his lower body that she'll help him with. Essentially, they're doing some physical therapy. And YRENE is like, hey, what magic was used to injure you? Like, clearly there was some magic. I can sense the vibes. It's yucky. What magic was used to injure you? And Chaol is, like, pretty reluctant to respond because he doesn't want to give information about, like, the word keys or the valve that could be used against Ardelayne if the Southern Continent decides not to ally with them. But YRENE, like, thinks to herself, what had occurred and had been horrible. She had healed people who had endured horrors, who could not reply to the questions she asked. And he might have served that butcher, but YRENE tried not to grimace as she realized what lay ahead. But hafiza had likely guessed before sending her to him. Healers often did not just repair wounds, but also the trauma that went along with them, not through magic, but through talking. Walking alongside the patient as they traveled through those dark, hard paths, closing her eyes, YRENE unspooled her magic into a gentle, probing thread and laid a palm on that splattered star atop his spine. The cold slammed into her, spikes of it firing through her blood and bones. YRENE reeled back as if she had been given a physical blow. Cold and dark in anger and agony, she clenched her jaw, fighting past this echo in the bone, sending that thread-thin probe of power a little farther into the dark. The pain would have been unbearable when it hit him. She's, like, probing around, like, has used her magic to, like, be kind of, like, inside of Chaol's injury, and she can distantly hear Chaol calling her name, but she's surrounded by this, like, cold black nothingness, and she flings her magic out, and she says the black scuttles back like a spider, and she's finally able to kind of, like, come back to herself. And she's immediately like, tell me what that was. A mess of darkness inside of you. And Chaol's like, is it in me? And Irene is like, sort of. I think it is only like an echo, something bigger, like a tattoo or a brand. It is not something living. And yet she flexed her fingers as if the mere probing of darkness with her magic had triggered such a response. And then a full-on onslaught. Tell me what it is. If I'm going to be dealing with that, I need to know everything you can tell me. Like, I need to know. Like, it's not a matter of curiosity. It's a matter of, like, if I'm going to be dealing with this, I need to know what I'm dealing with. And Chaol's like, I can't tell you. And Irene opened her mouth, but the Lord flicked his gaze towards the open door. Her warning to him silently echoed. Okay. And Irene understands that he's like, I can't, because they're gonna tell on me. And like, as we talked about, like, all the servants in this palace will report right back to the royal family, and I can't have them hearing what's going on. And Irene is like, okay, we'll work around it. And so she goes and starts to massage his back, and then they're like whispering back and forth in their ear. And Chaol starts to tell her everything he knows about the word gates and the word stone and the word hounds and the Valg and Erewhon and his princes and collars. And he's leaving out essentially only the specifics around the keys, the fact that Parrington is Erewhon, and also the fact that Dorian was collared by a Valg for many, many months. Irene then goes on to ask, you were struck by his power? Yes, he said at last, his voice still low. It meant to kill me, but I was spared. And Irene goes, by what? And Chaol says, a talisman that guarded me against such evil, the Eye of Elena, and a stroke of luck, of mercy, from a king who had tried to pull that final punch, not just as a kindness to him, but to Dorian. And then Irene says, Aelin Galathinius was there to destroy that glass castle. And Chaol says, yeah, me and Nesryn were helping too, actually. Honestly, that's why we were there that day. And he goes on to explain that the dark power belongs to their enemies. Like, that's what they are fighting against. And Irene is like, so if I heal you, you're just going to go back and fight against them. And Chaol says, yes, if you can figure this out. And Irene is like, okay, I need to do some research before I go further. Like, I have never dealt with something like this before. I'm going to look into the books we have in the library and see if anyone else has dealt with something like this. And Chaol's like, okay, what is this going to cost us? And Irene is like, you can donate any amount you wish to the tour, but like, there is no charge. Like, we do this for free. And Chaol is like, why? And Irene says, I was given this gift by Silva. It is not right to charge what was granted for free. Silva, the goddess of healing. He had known one other young woman who was goddess blessed. No wonder they both possessed such unbanked fire in their eyes. We love these goddess blessed girlies. Then Chaol says to her, like, why did you decide to help me? Like, I knew you were kind of on the fence about this. Like, what pushed you over? What made you decide to help me? And Irene says, I didn't want you to use my refusal against me when I returned to Fen Harrow. And Chaol's like, you plan to come back. You were planning to go north again. And Irene says, it is the right thing to do. With all I have been granted, all the kindness thrown my way. And Chaol's like, you don't have to help us. Like, Nesryn and I would not hold it against you if you decided you did not want to help me. And Irene is like, that's so ironic coming from someone who served an evil king. Like, I don't know if I can trust your character. Chaol says, I knew, he said quietly, that he had done and was doing unspeakable things. I knew that forces had tried to fight against him when I was a boy, and he had smashed them to bits. To become captain, I had to yield certain privileges, assets, and I did so willingly because my focus was on protecting the future, on Dorian. Even as boys, I knew he was not his father's son. I knew a better future lay with him if I could make sure Dorian lived long enough. If he not only lived, but also survived emotionally. If he had an ally, a true friend in that court of vipers. Neither of us was old enough, strong enough to challenge his father. We saw what happened to those who whispered of rebellion. I knew that if he set one foot out of line, his father would kill him, heir or no. So I craved the stability, the safety of the status quo. Irene's face had not altered or softened or hardened. What happened? He reached out for his shirt at last, fitting, he thought, that he had laid some part of himself bare while sitting here mostly naked. We met someone who set us all down a path I fought against until it cost me and others much. Too much. So you may look at me with resentment, YRENE Towers, and I will not blame you for it, but believe me when I say that there is no one in Aurelia who loathes me more than I do myself. He's my sweet baby angel, Enneagram 6. He believes that, like, his loyalty to Dorian, his friendship, and then because of this like, need to, like, keep things stable and secure is what was going to provide them a safe and secure future. Also, how can you hate this man? Believe me when I say that there's no one in Aurelia who loathes me more than I do myself. My angel baby. And Irene is like, okay, I need you to tell me what happened that day. And Chaol's like, I told you what happened. Like, I told you the deal with, like, the king and the Valg and all that stuff. And Irene is like, no, there's more. Like, facing the emotional consequences of your injury will be part of this process. Like, you need to unpack kind of the trauma around this event. And Chaol is like, I do not need to face anything. I know what happened before, during, and after. So, like, I'm good. I don't need to, like, talk it out with you. And Irene is like, okay, we'll see. We'll see about that. And she heads back to the tour, and particularly she goes to the basements of the tour. There's this place in the tour, which is this like a series of hot spring pools that are in the basement, and they are like lit by candles, and there are bells lining the ceiling because it became tradition for everyone who, as they enter the tour, to add your bell. You add your name and you add this bell. So like some of these bells have been here for years, some of them are brand new, and as the like steam from the pools rises, the bells kind of like tinkle. It seems gorgeous and stunning and amazing. Water, Silba's element. To bathe in the sacred waters here, untouched by the world above, was to enter Silba's very lifeblood. And so like this is a place for them to like rest and recover. It's a place of like mostly silence, and it's just like a place for them to kind of decompress after doing the fairly emotionally difficult and taxing job of healing. And she is thinking about how it's going to be difficult and probably take a while to heal Chaol. And she feels, a bit of her feels like it's wasting time. Like she could be helping people that are good people instead of helping this guy who has kind of contributed to so much evil and stood by as so much evil occurred. She is letting that kind of pass over. She's pondering that. She's looking up at the ceiling, and she feels this like the darkness saying to her, you must enter where you fear to tread. That this is important. This work that she's doing with Chaol is important. And her response is, I can't. Like, I don't know if I can do it. While she's in there, kind of like thinking about this, she hears like this soft weeping from another healer in one of the other pools. And like this is a place of silence, but she knows that also this healer, she can tell, is like fairly young, and she goes over to her and is like kind of talking with her and comforting her. And she just like silently holds her hand for a little bit, and the healer says that she had a 3-year-old patient who passed away that day, and how just like it's one of her first losses, and it was a hard one having a child loss. And so Irene is just like sitting with her, holding her hand, and the girl says to her, have you ever wished you didn't have this gift? Like today this gift is feeling like a burden to this girl. And Irene thinks to herself, like, no, her gift had always felt like a gift, a connection to her mother and to her purpose. Like she has always felt like deeply connected and like at peace with this magic. And she like sits with this girl for a while. Back at the palace, everyone's at dinner, and Hussar is like, hey, has Irene healed you yet? Has it worked? And Chaol's like, yeah, as talented as Irene is, she has not healed me yet. She's got to do some like research. We're still working on stuff, but like I'll let you know. I'll give you an update. And Hussar is like, okay, cool. And Nesryn is like, that is great. It's like more time for our two kingdoms to become united and to like, you know, chit chat. He's like looking around, there's like guards everywhere, and he's like pondering the fact that like he used to be a guard, but now he doesn't have legs that work, and so like he's not a guard anymore. And he's also like, it would be so easy for just like one of these guard to be Valg and like be incredibly dangerous. And he's like, you know what we should do? We should line up all the guards, and we should slice all of them. We should cut all of them, and if they bleed black, we'll know they're Valg. And if they try to like avoid coming to the bleeding, we'll also know they're Valg. Good idea, self. And he turns to the Khan, and he's like, can I request a private meeting with you? He's like, we probably actually need to have a conversation about the Valg and like the potential of the Valg being here. Khan is like, you may discuss such things with my chief vizier, who maintains my daily schedule. My focus remains on assisting my wife through her mourning. Like, we know that like the queen is really struggling after losing her youngest daughter, and so he obviously, most of his attention has been on her. And then Chaol, kind of getting shut down by the Khan, turns to Sartak and asks about his Rook Kadara, because he knows this will be like a fun topic of conversation. And Nesryn and Sartak start like kind of joking around about his rock, and like clearly have been chatting, you know, like it's very evident that they've been chatting. And we come to find out that he flies every morning with his rook, and Chaol gives eyeball orders. He's like, Nesryn, are you thinking what I'm thinking? And she is thinking what he's thinking, that Nesryn is going to the next day try to, or like at some point, try to go with him when he flies in these early morning hours and maybe have some like one-on-one time with Sartak. That night, Irene, meanwhile, is doing research in the library of the tour. They have like a pretty substantial library. She's down there doing research as like a big storm rolls through the city, and she can hear thunder and lightning outside. And she asks Nusha, the head librarian, to pull any writings that talk about like wounds from demons and wounds that left marks but no scar tissue, like anything that kind of sounds similar to what Chaol's injury is. And the Nusa has pulled hundreds of different manuscripts, which has a lot of documents in like different languages, including word marks. Irene has never seen word marks before. That's not something she's seen, but based on the way she describes them, like they're very clearly word marks. So she is looking through these, has been looking through these documents for a while, but nothing quite matches the description. Like nothing quite aligns with what Chaol's injury is. Then we also get like a side note of these fun little cats. So pause the story for a second, talk about the Bast cats. So Bast cats are like a little bit magic, and they kind of like are around the tour. They like don't belong to anyone. They just like run around the tour there. They have free reign of the tower and like the gardens and things, and seem to have like I said, some connection to magic. And some of the girls will sometimes say that like they can walk through walls, and girls will be like, I saw one reading a book the other day, like turning the pages with his paw. And like there's a lot of like stories about Bast cats. We don't know how many of them are like true, but like they definitely seem to have some sort of like magic, some sort of like deep connection to the tour and the magic within them. Irene is like all alone in her little corner of the library. She like looks up and realizes that she's all alone in the corner of the library, and it's feeling a little bad. Like the vibes are shifting in a way that doesn't feel great. And she like wishes there were a cat around. She like feels like if there were a cat around, she'd feel comforted because the cats would sense if something like really bad was happening, but she's like truly like alone in this corner of the library. And she's looking at this book that is written in Elway. And she knows a little bit because Elway was a neighboring country to Fenharrow, so there was some like overlap in terms of their language. And she's like slowly being able to like pick apart the title. She knows that the head librarian will be able to like helpfully translate it, but she's trying to get as much as she can by herself. And she is able to see that the title is called The Song of Beginning. And it's clearly a history book. And so she's mainly looking at the pictures. And one of the first pictures she comes across is this picture of this black gate on a hilltop, and this gate like leads to nowhere. There's like nothing around it. It's just like this lone gate on a hilltop, and there's also these like men surrounding the gate that look mostly human, but there's like something off about them. And we kind of quickly come to find out that they are probably Valg. And the subtitle of this image is Orcus, Mantix, and Erewhon, 3 Valg kings, wielder of the keys. Okay, so that's interesting. We've actually met one Valg king. Man, interesting to know there's 3 of them. And then there's another picture that shows like the step-by-step process of a Valg demon and how they like possess people. And that like shows this man being like tied down and then a demon, like the blackness entering him. And like, she's like, this is like suspicious. Interesting. But the vibes are getting worse in this corner of the library. Spooky Yuki. And she's not about it. And so Irene grabs the book, which is not totally against the rules, but like the librarians do appreciate keep the books in the library. And she picks up the book, she shoves it in her bag, and she's like getting ready to leave because after her time at the White Pig and after her like time with that like mysterious stranger who we know to be Aelin, she like trusts her gut. She trusts her vibe. She pays attention to her surroundings. She knows what she's supposed to be doing. And this situation seems bad, and so she's going to get out of there. And she hears Aelin's instructions kind of playing in her head. Like, she's like, look like you're more trouble than you are worth. And she knows that also, like, if anything were to happen, she's supposed to shout fire and not, like, help me so that people will pay attention, because more people will pay attention if she shouts fire than help me. Anyway, she's almost out of there when she feels something coming down one of the, like, aisles of the library. And it's gonna, like, meet her at this intersection. She's coming, like, this way, and it's coming, like, this way. And she knows they're gonna meet. And so instead of like running, which she knows will draw attention to her, she pretends to see like another healer up ahead and starts like having a conversation with this healer. And she's like, oh, I'll see you later, blah, 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 blah. And she's almost to this intersection. She thinks it's working. The footsteps of the thing coming down the aisle are stopping when she like bumps into something with her foot, and she looks down and she realizes it's the body of the woman from the womb, from the hot springs that she was down in earlier. Like the body of that healer is dead on the ground. She like reaches out her magic, she confirms that she's dead. But Irene, keeping her wits about her, knows she cannot stop here, like knows she can't take a moment to like check in with this healer, also cannot give up the charade that has like kind of worked on this creature that's coming for her. And so she has to pretend she hasn't noticed the dead girl, and she continues talking and hears the steps have halted, buying her little ack. And as she's like headed out, she bumps into this group of young acolytes, and she says, hey, trying to like be like, I need you to like do exactly as I say. No messing around, like scary things are happening. Hey, let's go get a cup of tea with Cook. Again, trying to convey the sense of urgency with her eyeballs. And they are like good. They are in her class, so they know her fairly well. They can like pick up on what she's kind of not saying, but trying to say with her eyeballs, and they follow her without asking any questions. And then she goes to the front desk and explains, like very quietly, a healer has been gravely attacked in the stacks of the main hall. Get everyone out and call for the royal guard now. And the librarian rings the bell on the desk, 3 times, which is a signal that everyone needs to get out. They have this system within the tower that is completely secret, that the bells mean something different, and 3 bells means like evacuate. And so those bells are rung and everyone just like gets up from their seats, leaves everything there, and just like pieces the heck out. They send the royal guard in to like sweep through the library. They find the body of the girl, but are unable to find anyone that could have been doing anything suspicious. The only thing that's weird is all of Irene's books that she had been reading are gone. The next day, Irene is very, very late. She was supposed to be back around the same time as before. I don't know if she like specifically said it or if Chaol was just anticipating that, but she's very, very late. And Chaol's actually all by himself because Nesryn left before dawn to go talk to Sartak. So Chaol's just like alone in his room, and so he starts to do like a workout because he doesn't want to waste time. So he's doing his best to work out and, you know, again, keep his muscles strong. When Irene finally does arrive, she's like 2 hours late, and she immediately sends Kaja, Chaol's servant, away. Like, she's like, Chaol has a rash on his legs that needs ointment. Here's the ingredients I need you to go get for me. And she notices that Chaol is like sweating and clearly has been like working out. And Irene is like, maybe you should go like work out in the barracks with like the guards, like you would back in Rifthold, instead of in your room where you're like sweating all over these like really nice rugs. Also, there's like really no tools for you. And Chaol's like, absolutely not. Like, there's no way he's going to, in his current state, go try to work out in the barracks because, again, he has a lot of shame around his injury. And then Irene updates him on the fact that a healer was killed in the library yesterday, and then goes on to be like, I think the things were then hunting me. Like, I think something is after me. I was researching what we spoke about yesterday. And Chaol is like, who do you think did it? And Irene is like, I don't know. I didn't see anyone. And we like had the library searched. There was no one there. Chaol says, what happened to the girl who died? Like, what were her injuries? And Irene was like, it looked as if the life were drained out of her. She looked like she had been dead for a long time. Like, she was desiccated. And even though like I had seen her hours earlier in the evening. And Chaol's like, okay, so that's obviously Valg, like that's what their victims look like. And Irene is like, yeah, and the weirdest part was, like, I left nothing was touched in the library except I left a stack of books that I was using to research on the table in the library, and they're all gone now. They like were gone when we came back. And she's like, and the thing is, the healer that was killed looked incredibly similar to me. Like, I'm worried they actually were trying to kill me, but they like got her instead in an accident because like we had very similar builds, and they just like got the wrong person. And Chaol's like, yeah, also, you know, the princess who died recently, the princess and I are a little suspicious that she was also murdered. And Irene is like, you need to warn the Kagan. Like, this is important. You need to warn him. Like, this is becoming very dangerous. And Chaol is like, yeah, I know. Did you come here under guard? And Irene is like, no, I mean, it's like the middle of the day. Like, I walked this walk a gajillion times. No, I just like walked here. And Chaol is like, I would not put middle of the day past the Valg. Like, you need to be more careful. I'm truly sorry about that healer, especially if his being here had somehow triggered this attack. If they had pursued Irene only because of her helping him, he added, you should be on your guard constantly. And Irene goes on, the young healers and the acolytes are so scared. Like, they're terrified of whatever happened. And Chaol's like, is there anything I can do to help? And Irene is like, actually, there is. I teach a self-defense class over at the tour, but there's only so much I know. Like, I teach them everything I know, but like, it's honestly not that much. I have made a promise to someone, to the person who taught me, to show and to teach it to as many women as possible. So I have. Once a week, I teach the acolytes along with any older students, healers, servants, or librarians who should like to know. And Chaol's like, you realize I'm in a wheelchair. And Irene is like, so the thing is, your mouth still works, and you're going to be teaching. I don't actually need you to defend these girls. I need you to teach them how to defend themselves. And Chaol is like, they might not find me a super reassuring instructor because, like, look at me. And Irene is like, yeah, you're right. Likely they'll be swooning and sighing over you so much they'll forget to be afraid. Like, you're right. It's probably, you're like too hot, honestly, for them to take seriously. It's mostly like teenage girls, and they're going to be like distracted. She's like, no, it'll be fine. We just need to figure out how to get you there. And Chaol's like, just shove me in a carriage. Easy breezy. And Irene is like, okay, stop with the anger. Like, I don't know why this anger is being directed at me. I didn't break your legs. You will ride a horse. And Chaol is like, you need legs to ride a horse. Irene, did you forget why you're here? And Irene is like, good thing you've still got legs. You have 2 legs. They just are not kind of working the way you would like them to. And Irene explains that she's been talking with the healers about some similarly injured people and how they ride, and looking into solutions for Chaol. And she will come to him at dawn tomorrow to help him figure out like how to arrange things, but like she has a good idea of how to get him on a horse and get him riding. And Chaol says to her, please do not give me this hope and then let it crumble. he says hoarsely. Like, the idea of being able to ride a horse gives him so much more freedom than he currently has access to. He's like, please don't like dangle this in front of me and then take it away. And Irene says, good healers don't do such things, Lord Westfall. Time to get started. So time for Irene to start using her magic to help him, not because her research turned anything up. She like really didn't learn anything new, but now she like really recognizes how important this is to get Chaol healed. And Chaol turns to her as she's like getting started, and he says to her, I will make sure you are safe while you are researching. He's like not sure how he will be able to do this since he cannot personally protect her in this way, but he's like he makes a promise that he will do whatever he can to make sure she stays safe. And Irene is like, I don't know if it's the research that they're mad about. I think it might be just like the fact that I'm working with you, that I'm healing you at all. And at that moment, Chaol like looks at her and he realizes how tired she looks and realizes that she probably didn't really sleep last night because of the whole incident with the acolyte. And Chaol is like, if you need, you can like nap here for a little bit and like I will watch over you and make sure nothing happens to you, and you can work on me later. You can like take care of me later. And Irene is like, no, I will not let them make me afraid. Like, I will work on you now, Chaol. And she immediately starts, and Chaol starts screaming. Like screaming bloody murder. And Irene is like, okay, obviously it hates my magic. Essentially what is happening is there's this like darkness that is like hiding and wrapped around Chaol's spinal injury, and so she can't actually get at the injury without getting rid of this darkness first. And she also realizes, kind of based on her healing experience, that he will probably need to be awake during it. It'll also hurt really bad, and it's probably feeding to some extent on his emotions. As we know, like the Valg love to feed on like the emotions and fears and like bad negative parts of you. And so Irene is like, no, we're gonna definitely need to kind of work through some of that as well, do some inner work. And Irene is again, maybe we should talk about what happened. And Chaol is like, there's nothing to talk about, bestie. And Irene is like, that seems like a lie. Remember how yesterday you said no one loathes you like you loathe yourself? That does seem like something we could possibly unpack and like chit chat about, you know? It seems like there's something there. And Chaol is reluctant, but Irene is like, the more you talk, the faster you will be out of here. And Chaol's like, no, I'm like totally fine. There's nothing to talk about. I am the most stable and together person you've ever met in your entire life. And so Irene is like, fine. And she gives him this like strip of leather for him to bite down on and begins to work on his spine. Meanwhile, Nesryn did leave first thing in the morning to go meet Sartak in the Eyrie before dawn. And Sartak is like excited to see Nesryn, and he invites her to come with him that morning on Kadara for a morning flight. And Nesryn is like not super excited about the idea because like heights are not like her favorite thing in the world, but she like agrees to it because she's here trying to do her job. Like if Nesryn is going to do one thing, it's going to be her assignment. Okay. She's the girl you want working with you on your group project. Anyway, they jump on Kadara, again, this like giant bird thing, and they fly silently for a while, and Nesryn is just in awe of how beautiful it is, like how beautiful the landscape is underneath her. The city has like faded away, and now they're like flying over like the countryside of like the northern part of the southern continent, and it's just like gorgeous. And she like recognizes the land below her as her home. She like feels deeply connected to it, even though this is not really where she grew up. And Nesryn is like, I don't know why my father ever left here. And more than that, I don't know why he never returned. Like, this is where we should be. And she tells this to Sartak. She says, I can see why you are so eager to return to camp. She, like, likes the city, but, like, the rural area around them is just, like, stunning. And Sartak is like, well, my father's palace is pretty nice. And Nesryn is like, it is, but this is breathtaking. They start talking again, and they talk about, Sartak's sister's death and how that has affected him and how it has rattled kind of their whole family. And Nesryn explains what happened in like a kind of a truncated version of what happened in Rifthold, and how working with Aelin has been for her, and how Aelin is like a difficult but good woman, and like how she really believes in the cause that Aelin is putting forward, and how Parrington is like truly evil, and that Aelin needs to win in order for peace and anything good to flourish in the northern continent. And as they are talking about that, Sartak asks about Aelin, and he says, is she truly as powerful as everyone says? And Nesryn says, she and Dorian both possess considerable magic, but I would say it is their intelligence that is the stronger weapon. Brute power is useless without it. And Sartak is like, it is dangerous without it. Like, power without intelligence, and I would say, I'm going to add on to this, without intelligence and without kindness is dangerous. And then Sartak goes on to explain that the reason that this conversation needs to happen in the skies, like away from everything, is because the spies in the palace are just like so everywhere. Like there's no way to escape the level of spies that are happening in the palace. His siblings are all up in everybody's business. But he is really interested in hearing Nesryn and Chaol out. He like thinks this allying between their two countries like makes a lot of sense actually, and he is like very on board with like Team Aelin. And then he kind of fills Nesryn in on the incident that happened in the Taurus library and how it might be connected back to what they're worried about with the Valg. Back with Chaol and YRENE, we are joining them post-healing. YRENE is like panting on the floor. She tried to get around that dark magic the entire time. Chaol is screaming. He's like truly in agony. And YRENE tries to pry like any crack in the darkness with her magic, but the moment she like stopped like actively forcing her magic through this cracks in this giant black wall, the magic reformed. Like she would get like widen the crack an inch, and then she would like take a breath and it would reform. YRENE's magic had turned brittle before it. Any spark of defiance in the wake of that healer's death had cooled, and she could not see, did not dare look at what she felt gathering there, what filled the darkness with voices, as if they were echoing down a long hall. The dark was alive, swimming with images, one after another, as if she were looking through someone's eyes, and she knew on instinct that they did not belong to Lord Chaol. A fortress of dark stone jetted up amid ash-colored, barren mountains, its tower sharp as lances, its edges and parapets hard and slicing. Beyond it, coating the vales and the plains amid the mountains, an army rippled away into the distance, more campfires than she could count. And she knew the name for this place, the assembled host, heard the name thunder through her mind as if it were the beat of a hammer on anvil, Moranth. And YRENE quickly realizes that like Moranth is what they're facing on the northern continent, that somehow she has gotten a glimpse into like this enemy army's world. And she also realizes it's going to take a while to heal him, but she also is like, oh, if I learn how to heal him, this is something that's going to be helpful once I return home. Like, this is going to be something I'm going to be facing again and again once I return home, because this is the forces that are against my people. So this is actually good work for me to be doing, because I'm learning how to do it in this environment so I can then do it more efficiently when I'm out in the world. And she looks up at the clock, and she knows it's been a while, but she doesn't realize how long. She looks up at the clock, it's been 5 hours, and she recognizes that this entire time Chaol has been screaming. He's been in agony, but not once did he ask her to stop. And instead, he reaches for her hand, because she's like collapsed on the floor, and is like, hey, are you okay? And YRENE is like, I should be asking you that. Can you feel anything? And Chaol's like, no. And YRENE tries to get up to get him some tea, but he insists that she rests, and Chaol calls for the servant to bring them both tea instead. He's like, both of us need a minute, okay? That was a rough time for everybody. And Chaol insists that YRENE drink, because she's just kind of like staring at him, and he's like, if you don't drink this tea, we're gonna just keep sitting here. I'm not gonna let you leave until you drink this. She's like ignoring him, like still not drinking the tea, and Chaol says to her, so that's the line. You can stomach helping me, but I can't return the favor, or can't do anything that steps beyond your idea of what? Of who I am. Resent me all you want, but you need to drink. And he then literally holds her teacup to her mouth and tips it for her, and like gives her sips of her tea in her mouth. Okay, cute, fun, fresh. Then she's like feeling better. She starts to sip her own tea, and he starts to drink his tea, and they start to feel better and recover. And then Chaol is like, I imagine you are starving, because I am starving. Do you want to stay here and eat with me before you head back? I know, like, it's kind of almost dinner, but like I'm not gonna make it till dinner time. But YRENE is like, no, I can't eat with you. Like, dining with him, that feels like crossing a line. Instead, she's like, I need to get back to the tour, and like, there's stuff that needs to happen. But then Chaol is like, okay, I'll see you tomorrow. Remember, you're gonna take me horseback riding, and then I'm gonna teach the girlies how to fight. 5 hours of agony, and she'd known it had not all been physical. She'd sensed, shoving against that wall, the darkness that had showed him things on the other side of it. Glimmers had sometimes shivered past her. Nothing she could make up, but they had felt like memories and nightmares, perhaps both. And yet he had not asked her to stop. And part of YRENE wondered as she trudged through the palace if Lord Chaol had not asked her to stop, not just because he'd learned how to manage pain, but also because he somehow felt he deserved it. And Chaol kind of spends the afternoon just like vibing in his underwear. He like has not enough energy to even put his pants back on until like Nesryn returns, and Nesryn is like windswept and just like glowing, and she's like, I had the best day ever. I had such a fun day. Chaol has been tortured for 5 hours, and Nesryn's like, I went flying and it was sick. And she updates Chaol on like Sartak's possible sympathies towards Terrasen and their cause, and Chaol literally is trying not to fall asleep. Like, he is exhausted from the work they were doing. And then he talks to Nesryn, and he's like, okay, like, keep that up, but also can you go hunting for Valg in the city? He hates the idea of putting her in danger, but he can't do it, and he needs her to investigate like what happened at the tour and to see if like there are Valg afoot. And he's like, please be careful. And she's like, for sure. And she heads out. She first goes to dinner. Chaol has gone to bed already. He skips dinner. She goes to dinner, and then after dinner, she's heading out of the palace, and she sees the queen on her way out, just like wandering around in the gardens alone. And she like makes note of it. She avoids the queen seeing her, but she like heads out. She's headed to the tour to see if there's anything kind of like around there that might give them some clues into like how that thing got into the library last night. When she arrives at the gate, Sartak sneaks up on her and is like, yeah, we were like really wondering if the gates were open last night. And at first she doesn't know who it is and she's startled, but then immediately catches that it's Sartak. And she's like, were you following me? And he says, well, you weren't exactly sneaky. You left like through the front gates, armed to the teeth. So like, yeah. And Nesryn's like, well, I have no reason to hide. And he's like, okay, you were the one asking if I was following you. So like, I'm just telling you what you asked. And she talks about how she is, investigating how someone might have gotten into the tour. The way she's talking, Sartak says, it seems like you know a lot about what might have done this. And Nesryn says, if it is who we suspect, I became intimately familiar with them this past year in Rifthold. Like, I know the Valg because I fought the Valg. And Sartak, low-key, knows that because they had spies report kind of what was happening in Rifthold, and he knew that there was just, like, monsters running around, running afoot in Rifthold, and that it was, like, a pretty scary place up there. And then Nesryn mentions to him that she saw his mother just like wandering around in the gardens like completely alone, like no guards with her and no one escorting her. And he seems a little concerned about that. And Nesryn tells her own story of how kind of like swallowed by grief she was in the years after her mother's death, and how difficult that is to deal with, and how she like really feels him on that. And then Sartak asks, where is your family now after those attacks on Rifthold? And Nesryn says, I don't know. Like, I know they made it out of the city, but I don't know what has happened to them since then. And Sartak is like, I will send word to my spies to look for them and to send any updates if they, like, see or hear anything about the Philippe family. And Nesryn is like, thank you. Like, thank you. This is something that she really would love some more information. And Nesryn is like reluctant to give Sartak too much information about the Valg, but eventually decides to tell him to avoid black rings and collars, and she tells him as much as she knows about the Valg, leaving out the bit about the word keys. Again, we are not talking about the word keys because like that power really we would not like randos to have access to. Sartak is like, when were we going to tell my father this? And Nesryn says, yeah, that's why we've been trying to arrange a private meeting. We've been trying to tell him this. And Sartak is like, okay, yeah, like he's been dealing with a lot, so understandable. But he's like, this is actually ringing a lot of bells of stories I heard in my childhood when I was down with the Ruckin down in the mountains in the south. These stories sound familiar. But she's like, do you know if there are any sewers that lead to the tour that come through here and lead to the tour? And Sartak is like, I don't know, but I would love to come find out with you. Like, I think we should go on a little adventure together and find out. The next morning, YRENE oversleeps. She wakes up and it's dawn, and that's when she was supposed to meet Chaol at the palace. And so she like just like gets up and runs over. She was just like exhausted the night before. She like fell asleep in her clothes. She like was trying to eat dinner and like it landed all over herself. She has like a stain on herself. Her hair is a mess. She gets to the courtyard, and by the time she arrives, he's already trying to get up on a horse. Like he has two guards on either side of him, and he's like using one guard to kind of like lift himself and the other guard to kind of like steady him as he like tries to pull himself up onto this horse without legs. The saddle is modified to strap him in as he rides to provide kind of like stability since he can't grip the horse with his legs. He gets up and he's able to kind of like swing himself around, and then he finally notices YRENE, and YRENE also realizes that she didn't brush her hair. She still has the stain from last night's dinner on her shirt. She is wrinkled and rumpled and she looks a mess, and she's like, hi. There's no time to deal with that. Chaol insists that YRENE ride too. He's like, if I have to ride a horse, you have to ride a horse. She's a little bit nervous. She hasn't been on a horse in a while. And she also isn't wearing appropriate clothing. She's wearing a dress and she's going to be riding a horse. And so one of her legs is like exposed to like mid-thigh because she has to like, ride a horse, and the skirt's gotta go somewhere. And Chaol's having like a great time. There's so much more freedom and being able to ride a horse. He can go so many more places. He can deal with a stair. He can deal with uneven terrain with this horse. And although like obviously not the level of freedom he experienced when he could walk, it is like a level of freedom he hasn't had since his injury. And they're riding through town. It's the first time he's really been in town either. Like they kind of just like went straight to the palace when they got here. And he's glaring at everyone who like stares at YRENE. He's like, a lot of girlies, by girlies I mean men, a lot of men are staring at YRENE and kind of especially her exposed leg, and he is glaring at anyone who looks at her a little too long because he doesn't want her to feel uncomfortable. He like is not cool with anyone making YRENE feel uncomfortable. And they're chatting as they ride, and are kind of chatting about how differently things are run here and how Irene feels much safer here because the law is applied equally to everyone, like whether you are rich or poor, like the laws are applied in the same way. And so although, like, you know, men are still men and things can be dangerous for a young woman, there is like crimes are prosecuted in a way that kind of makes her feel a little bit safer. Where in Rifthold, like, things were not equal. And Kayla's like, I want you to know that the new king is like very different. Like, he's different. He like will probably make these changes and adapt. He's like always really admired the Kagan up here in the way he has ruled his people. So like, I think Rifthold will be better if Dorian is the king. Irene once again says, what happened in those months that you were not telling me about? And Kayla's like, you were trying to trick me into talking again. I don't know why he's thinking this is like a trick, because honestly, she just asked him a question. And Irene says, I want to know. I've seen glimpses of what's inside. You need to take ownership of it. Like, I've seen the darkness inside of you. I need you to, like, process it, my friend. And Kayla's like, let's make a deal then. You tell me your secrets, YRENE Towers, and I will tell you mine. Then they arrive at the tour and they are past the gates and they're in these beautiful, lush, like, gardens. There's like herbs everywhere. It smells gorgeous. Kayla's like, this is the most peaceful place I've ever been in my entire life. And there are 24 women just like waiting for lessons. And Irene like hops down off her horse and Kayla is like, oh no, I have to get off my horse. I don't know how I'm going to do that. Like, getting up here was tricky enough and I had multiple guards helping me. And now I have to get down for the first time in front of all of these women. Irene turned to him, assessing the brace in the saddle as the crunch of approaching wheels on gravel filled the courtyard. The amusement faded. Dismounting in front of these women. Enough. The word sounded through him. If he could not endure it in front of a group of the world's best healers, then he would deserve to suffer. He had offered his help. He would give it. For indeed, there were some younger girls in the back who were pale, shifting on their feet, nervous. This sanctuary, this lovely place, a shadow had crept over it. He would do what he could to push it back. He's a good man, Savannah. Do you know that TikTok sound? I feel that sound all the time. Anytime anyone's talking about Kale. And I'm like, he's a good man. He's a good man. He like feels a lot of shame around this. And then he stops himself and he says, you know what? My shame is not important right now. What's important right now is making sure these girls feel safe. And I can contribute to making sure they're safe. They feel safe. And that is more important than any shame I have in this moment. All the young women are giggling because they obviously think he's like very handsome. They think he's very swoony. But he thinks to himself, like, as soon as they see me get off this horse, they're not going to be so smitten. Like, they're not going to be interested in me anymore. Once they see my legs don't work. There's just like so much shame for my baby boy Kale. Irene introduces Kale to Hafiza, and then it then goes on to just like start explaining his injury to the women and how they used a modified saddle to help him ride. And it really dehumanizes him. It makes him feel like he's an experiment, something that she's brought in for like show and tell, essentially. And then Irene is like, who wants to help him down? And Kale, again, just feels so much shame as like a dozen hands shoot up. And Irene continues talking about his injuries and how, like, his manhood still works. Like, she's, like, laying it all out for these girlies right in front of him. And the women that are helping him are, like, fumbling him. And he almost falls. He, like, almost hits him on the head. He's, like, just being, like, tossed around like a sack of potatoes. It's, like, really embarrassed. He feels like he's just naked in front of all these women. Like, this is just, like, shattering for him. He hates it. And then Irene turns around and is like, girls, you did a really bad job taking this man out of this horse. But we will talk about it later. Put Lord Westfall in his chair. And so they, like, plop him in his chair. And then Hafiza tells Irene to get the girls ready and then comes over to have a chat with Kale. And she like kneels down and helps him like readjust his legs because the girls did do a poor job of like putting him in his wheelchair, adjust his leg, make sure his shoes are on correctly and like make sure he's settled and is like, hey, this is a place for learning, Hafiza says. Older students teach the younger. Even with her accent, he understood her perfectly. It was Irene's instinct, Lord Westfall, to show the girls what she did with the brace, to let them learn for themselves what it is to have a patient with similar difficulties. To receive this training, Irene herself had to venture out to the steppes. Many of these girls might not have that opportunity, at least not for several years. She means well, my Irene. Kales doesn't answer, and then Hafiza continues, and she says, there are many other scars, my lord, beyond the one on her neck. Like, Hafiza knows why Kayla is upset, and is also like, please forgive her. Like, she's out here trying her best. She like, just didn't think. She wasn't trying to be malicious, I promise. And then Irene is ready to start the lesson. And she's like, where did we leave off last time? And the girlies are like, we left off with eye gouges. And she has someone volunteer to demonstrate. And she shows like what you do. You like stick your fingers in and you go pop. And she like made a sound effect as she pops the eyes out. And the girls laugh as the sound effect happens. And Kale thinks to himself, Aelin would have been beside herself with glee. Oh, I love this moment because, again, we have the dramatic irony of us knowing that the reason Irene is here is because of Aelin, and the reason she's teaching this class is because of Aelin. And so for Chaol to think of Aelin and to be like, Aelin would love this class, not even knowing the connection between those two, it's perfection. It's perfection. I'm crying a little bit. This makes me cry a little bit because I think it is so beautiful that even if Aelin had never stepped into her power, even if she had rejected her responsibility as queen, and she had run away with Sam, she would have done so much good. Like, just her small acts of kindness, even when she was just an assassin, does this, changes the world, changes lives. Irene goes on to explain that they're in the 4th lesson of the quarter, and Chaol thinks to himself, he trained young men ready to shed blood, not heal people. But defense was the first lesson he taught, and he had taught those young guards, before they'd wound up hanging from the castle gates. Rhys's battered, unseeing face flashed into his mind. What good had it done any of them when it had mattered? Not one of that core group he'd trusted and trained and worked with for years. Not one had survived. Brullo, his mentor and predecessor, had taught him all he knew, and what had it earned any of them? Anyone he'd encountered, he'd touched, they'd suffered. The lives he'd sworn to protect. What good had any of it done for his city, his people, when it was sacked? He looked up to find the lines of women watching him, curiosity on their faces, waiting. There had been a moment when he had hurled his sword into the Avery, when he had been unable to bear its weight at his side, in his hand, and had chucked it, and everything the captain of the guard had meant into the dark, eddying waters. He had been sinking and drowning since, long before his spine. He wasn't sure if he'd ever tried to swim. Not since that sword had gone into the river. Not since he'd left Dorian in that room with his father and told his friend, his brother, that he loved him, and knew it was goodbye. He'd left. In every sense of the word, Chaol forced himself to take a breath. To try. I'm not crying, you're crying. If you hate Chaol, I think it said a lot about you as a person. I think it said a lot about you as a person. I don't know if I can trust you. I don't need you to like Chaol, okay? That's different. But if you hate Chaol, you cannot stand Chaol, you can't see any good in Chaol, I don't know if I can trust you as a person. Sorry. He's a good man, Savannah. Chaol starts teach and pretty quickly learns that Irene has already taught them a lot. A lot of the first lessons that he would teach his soldiers, Irene has already taught them. She's already taught them the foundations. And so the thing he decides to teach them is how to flip a guy over. If a big guy comes, how to use their body weight against them and flip them over, which is something I haven't learned yet. And he teaches the lesson. The girlies love it. Every single one of them gets to flip a man before the end of the lesson, and everyone's laughing and giggling, but Irene can tell that Chaol is pissed at her. He is angry the whole time. And once the girls leave, Irene comes over to talk to him, and she's like, hey, that went really well. I'd love to have you back next week if you're up for it. We can either stay here and do the healing work at the palace. Or we can stay here. I can find a room somewhere in the tour and we can do the healing work here, or we can head back to the palace. And Chaol is like, palace. And they ride back in silence, and Irene is trying to figure out what she might have done that made him so angry with her. She's like, everything seemed like it went really well. I don't know what would have happened. And they get back to the palace, and Chaol is helped off of his horse, and then he turns to Irene and he says, are you going to push me in my chair, or shall I do it myself? And Irene is like, you can move it just fine. She's a little bit confused, but also immediately hostile, because his tone is giving hostile. And Chaol says to her, perhaps you should ask one of your acolytes to do it, or 5 of them, or whatever number you deemed fit to deal with an Ardalanian lord. And Irene walks off annoyed, but really, and kind of strolls quickly. And she's not paying attention to where she's going. She bumps right into Cashin, who immediately points out the stain on her dress, which is a rude move, and is like, hey, we can get you new clothes and do the laundry if you want. You look a little rough for wear. And she's like, no. And he's trying to chat with her and ask about what happened in the library and how she's doing, and be like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And also ask how Chaol's healing process is going. And Irene is trying to shut it down at every corner. She's trying to leave. She's like, I gotta go, actually, Chaol's waiting for me. And Cashin is like, didn't you guys arrive back here together? And she's like, yeah, but I need to meet him. I gotta go. I gotta meet him in his room. I'm so busy. Bye. She just really is trying to shut down this combo. And Chaol catches up with her as she rounds to the next corner. And Chaol is like, I almost feel bad for the guy. I was too far to hear what you said to him, but I saw his face. And he seems heartbroken. And Irene is like, you don't know what you're talking about. Also, did I do something to offend you today? Why are you being so cranky with me? And Chaol says, what did that prince ever do to you? like still talking about cash in. And YRENE says, that is literally none of your business. Get back to the room and Nesryn's there and was like, oh my gosh, hey Chaol, I was wondering where you were. That does bother me a little bit, the fact that Chaol was like, hey, Nesryn, you have to tell me every time you go somewhere, like if plans change, and he didn't think to ask to tell Nesryn where he was going. It seems like kind of a double standard there, Mr. Chaol. But anyway, Nesryn doesn't seem too bothered by it, so I guess I don't need to be too bothered by it either. They explain where he was and how he like went horseback riding and how he was able to go horseback riding. And Nesryn is like so excited by this, that this like little bit of hope, this glimmer that like even if they're not able to fix his injury, that he's going to be able to live the kind of life he wants to live. Nesryn is like, oh my gosh, if you go horseback riding again, I would love to come. Like maybe we could go to my uncle's house. I would love to show you that. I'm actually headed there right now, and then I actually have to go meet with you know who. Not Voldemort, but the other one. And then Nesryn leaves. And then Chaol, then we're just left with Chaol and YRENE, and Chaol is like, okay, we're doing the healing in my bed today. I know we did it on the couch last time, but like I need to be comfortable as I like lay in agony for 5 hours. The bed's more comfortable. Also, I don't really want you collapsing onto the floor, so I would feel better if you were on the bed. And YRENE is like, this is really inappropriate. And Chaol is like, I don't care anymore. And then as they walk into the bed chamber, YRENE says to Chaol, like, tell me what I did to upset you. And Chaol says, you mean beyond displaying me like some broken doll in front of your acolytes and having them haul me off a horse like a limp fish. And YRENE is like, the tour is like a place of learning. I wanted to show them something they might encounter. Like I wanted to give them access to this injury so they might be able to help future patients. And Chaol is like, you showed me off like your prized shattered horse. And YRENE is like, I didn't mean it like that. And you know it. Like, you know I didn't mean that. And Chaol says, was it some sort of punishment for serving the king? For being from Ardalan? And YRENE is like, no, I just wanted to show them. And Chaol goes, do you know how hard it is to go from this, he says, pointing at YRENE, who was just like standing there, to this, he says, pointing to himself and his like being stuck in this chair. And today you made it harder. Like you made this even harder on me. And YRENE is like, I am sorry. And Chaol goes, everything I thought, everything I had planned and wanted, it's gone. All I have left is my king and this ridiculous, slim scrap of hope that we will survive this war and I can find some way to make something of it. And YRENE goes, of what? And Chaol goes, of everything that crumbled in my hands, everything. And YRENE says, I'm sorry, I should have considered your feelings on the matter. I like didn't even think of them, to be honest. And he like takes off his shirt and his pants without another word and gets onto the bed, and he's like still really angry. And YRENE, like part of her wants to leave. Part of her is like, I don't have to tolerate this like angry man who's mad at me for like just doing my job. But she knows if she leaves, it will break the trust irreparably between the two of them, and they need that trust in order for her to be able to heal him. And so she follows them, and he's like laying down in the bed. And he says to her, is your grudge against me specifically or Ardalan in general? And YRENE silently like passes him the bed. She like doesn't answer immediately. And he like bites down on the leather. And then right before she's about to start healing him, she says to him quietly, soldiers from Ardalan burned my mother alive when I was 11. And then she starts. She does not give Chaol a chance to respond. But she's like, hey, you know how you're like so mad at me because I'm a little bit prejudiced against Ardalan? Well, it's because your king's men burned my mother alive. So there was only darkness and pain. He roared against it, distantly aware of the bit in his mouth, the rawness of his throat. Burned alive, burned alive, burned alive. The void showed him fire. A woman with golden brown hair and matching skin, screaming in agony towards the heavens. It showed him a broken body on the bloody bed, a head rolling across the marble floor. You did this, you did this, you did this. It showed a woman with eyes of blue flame and hair of pure gold poised above him, a dagger raised and angling to plunge into his heart. He sometimes wished that she hadn't been stopped. The scar on his face from the nail she'd gouged into it when she first struck him. It was that hateful wish he thought of when he looked in the mirror. The body on the bed, and that cold room, and that scream. The collar on a tan throat, and a smile that did not belong to a beloved's face. The heart he'd offered and been left to drop on the wooden planks of the river docks. An assassin who had sailed away, and a queen who had returned. A row of fine men hanging from the castle gates. All held within that slim scar. What he could not forgive or forget. The void showed it to him again and again. It lashed his body with red-hot pronged whips and showed him those things over and over. It showed him his mother and his brother and his father, everything he had left, what he had failed, what he had hated, and what he'd become. The lines between the last two had blurred, and he had tried. He had tried these weeks and these months. But then, just for a moment, there's a prick of pure white light in the distance. In this darkness, there's this moment of light that cuts through the darkness. But as soon as it appears, it vanishes again. And he is once again like thinking about his family and his shame over leaving his brother behind, and how he had chosen Dorian over his like blood brother. And he feels as if this darkness will kill him as it like squeezes tight around him, like suffocating him. But the light comes back, breaks into the darkness. It comes back and it's stronger this time. White light slammed into him, blinding him, filling that void, the darkness, shrieking, surging back, then rising like a tidal wave around him, only to bounce off a shell of that white light, wrapped around him, a rock against which the blackness broke. A light in the abyss. It was warm and quiet and kind. It did not balk at the dark, as if it had dwelled in darkness for a long, long time, and now it understood how it worked. And then Chaol comes to, and he's sitting next to YRENE, who is literally covered in blood. She's like been bleeding out of her nose for a while now. She's been bleeding out of her nose for a while now. She's literally covered in blood sitting next to him. And Chaol's like, is that normal, the fact that you're covered in blood? And she's like, yeah, totally, for sure. And Chaol's like, you're clearly a liar. That's not normal. You need to lie down and rest right now. Like, do not move. Lie down. The girlies do not want me to finish. The girlies, I mean this camera and the stack of books it's resting on. Things are falling apart. Chaol's like, you're lying to me. Obviously, bleeding out of your nose is not normal. Lie down and rest right now. And she lays there for a second. As she's laying there, her bleeding stops. And Chaol is just like, how? Like, he definitely like felt her, and this, like, something changed. And he wants to know like what she did. YRENE says, there was this big black wall that I kept attacking with my magic. I think I could kind of like see more through it. It was like a mountain of horrors, but it was all a distraction. I listened to the sound of your screaming and I followed it and I found you. And whatever was in there with you was so busy ripping you apart it didn't see me. And then Chaol says to her, like, I'm sorry about your mother. And he has like realized in his head that like her mother's death would have been around the same time Aelin lost her own parents, and it connects it back to that story, and has once again recognizing the way in which Ardalayne has just like destroyed the lives of these people that he's loved in their families. And YRENE says she died saving me. Ugh. And then Chaol goes on, and he says in response to this, I watched the king of Ardalayne butcher the woman Dorian loved in front of me. I could do nothing to stop it, to save her. And when the king went to kill me for planning to overthrow him, Dorian stepped in. He took on his father and bought me time to run. And I ran. I ran because there was no one else to carry on the rebellion, to get word to the people who needed it. I let him take on his father and face the consequences and fled. She watched him in silence. He's fine now, though. I don't know. Chaol says. He is free, he is alive, but is he fine? He suffered greatly, in ways I can't begin to. His throat tightened to the point of pain. It should have been me. I had always planned for it to be me instead. And there we go. They like traded one secret for another. Remember when they were on the horses and Chaol was like, I will tell you about my deepest, darkest secrets if you tell me yours. And YRENE gave a secret and Chaol gave a secret. This way that he has felt since he left Dorian alone with his father, that he has felt responsible for that he has bared the weight of that. And we saw that in Queen of Shadows, that he was kind of unwilling to admit that to himself, but we could tell that he was feeling that the heaviness of what he had done, the guilt over leaving Dorian. And he's like kind of facing it for the first time. The fact that he feels responsible for everything that happened to Dorian, for Sorce's death, and for the time he had spent in that collar, and that he should have protected his friend. Like his one responsibility in this life, he felt, was to take care of Dorian and make sure that Dorian made it to the throne safely. And he like sort of has, but also not in the ways that Chaol would have wanted. Like Chaol would have wanted him to have to endure less. This book doesn't make me cry. It's like soft. Has anything really happened in this book yet? No, but like a lot has happened in our hearts. Okay, and that's what Tower of Dawn is about. It's about our hearts. And so if you want to follow along on our Tower of Dawn journey, which obviously you do, who wouldn't, make sure to subscribe. Okay. I will talk to you later.